The bullet entered through the scope. 1 second, the enemy sniper was tracking American soldiers trapped below. The next, he was gone. Dropped by a shot fired from a position command swore didn't exist. His spotter froze, scanning ridgelines through panicked breath, searching for the shadow that just erased his partner from 900 meters out. Found nothing. Just wind. Just stone. Just the impossible geometry of a kill that shouldn't have been possible. Down in the valley, 12 Rangers were bleeding out in an ambush built to leave no survivors. Air support grounded. Reinforcements 40 minutes away. Every tactical advantage belonged to the enemy. Except one. Somewhere in those mountains, someone was hunting the hunters. And nobody, not command, not the enemy, not even the men she was saving, knew she was there. If you want to see how a ghost turned the tide of an impossible battle, stay with me until the end. Like this video and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Because what happened in that valley wasn't magic, it was mathematics. And the woman behind the rifle had been doing the math while everyone else was just trying to survive. The valley had a name on the map, Carez Pass. The locals called it something else, Maqbara, the graveyard. Captain Dalton Hayes didn't speak Pashto, but he'd been in country long enough to recognize a warning when he heard one. He'd stood in the operations tent 3 days ago, staring at aerial imagery of the narrow corridor cutting through the Korengal, while Lieutenant Vickers traced the planned route with a laser pointer. Fastest approach to the target compound, Vickers had said, confident. Saves us 6 hours of exposed movement through open terrain. Dalton had zoomed in on the satellite view. Steep ridges, limited egress points, textbook ambush country. We're walking into a funnel, he'd said. We'll have overwatch, Vickers replied. Predator coverage. QRF on standby. Dalton had opened his mouth to push back, then stopped. He'd been overruled on patrol routes twice already this month. Command wanted speed, they wanted results. They wanted Taliban leadership off the board before the winter freeze locked down the mountains. So he'd signed off. Now, 3 clicks into Carez Pass, Dalton understood exactly what kind of mistake he'd made. The valley walls rose like cathedral sides, gray stone streaked with mineral veins that looked like old scars. Morning sun hadn't reached the canyon floor yet. The patrol moved in a staggered column, 12 Rangers, weapons low ready, scanning sectors out of habit more than hope. Radio chatter was minimal, just the steady click of PTT buttons, check-ins every 90 seconds. Specialist Danny Ortega walked point, 20 meters ahead, former college track star. Could run a 6-minute mile in full kit. He joked before insertion that if this went sideways, he'd just outrun the Taliban. Nobody was laughing now. Alpha 1, this is 2-6, Dalton transmitted quietly. We're 15 minutes from phase line copper, still clear. Static crackled. Then Vickers' voice, distant and compressed through satellite relay. Copy 2-6. Predator shows no thermal signatures in your sector. You're good to proceed. Dalton didn't reply. He was watching Ortega slow down 30 meters ahead, head tilted, rifle coming up incrementally. Then Ortega's hand went vertical, fist closed. Freeze. The entire column stopped like someone had cut power. No rustling. No boot scrapes. 12 men became part of the landscape in the span of a heartbeat. Dalton moved forward carefully, staying low, scanning the ridgelines. He reached Ortega and crouched beside him. What have you got? Dalton whispered. Ortega didn't look away from the rocks ahead. It's too quiet, sir. Dalton listened, wind moving through the pass, the distant call of a raptor somewhere high above. Nothing else. Birds should be louder, Ortega said. Insects, too. Something ran them off. Dalton felt the first cold finger of dread trace down his spine. Ortega grew up hunting whitetail in Wyoming backcountry. If he said the environment was wrong, it was wrong. 2-6 to Alpha. We're holding position, Dalton transmitted. Request immediate ISR sweep, thermal, and motion. Vickers came back fast. Stand by! 30 seconds crawled past. Dalton's eyes moved across the high ground. Stone, scrub brush, shadow. Nothing moved. 2-6, Predators clean, no contacts. Dalton keyed his radio. Recommend we abort, and the world detonated. The first RPG hit 20 meters behind them, turning the rear guard's position into a fireball of shrapnel and superheated gas. The shockwave slammed through Dalton's chest like a physical blow. His ears went flat, sound replaced by a high metallic whine. Then the ridge to his left erupted with muzzle flashes. PKM fire ripped through the column at chest height. Rounds snapped past so close Dalton felt the pressure waves kiss his cheek. Rock exploded into dust clouds. Ricochets screamed off stone. "Contact left! Contact left!" Someone was screaming into the radio. Dalton couldn't tell who. He threw himself behind a boulder as another RPG arced overhead and detonated against the far canyon wall, spraying the patrol with rock fragments. Training took over. His body moved before his brain caught up. "Break right! Get to cover!" Rangers scattered, diving behind whatever terrain they could find. Return fire crackled outward, short controlled bursts from M4s answered by the heavier stutter of AKs and machine guns. Dalton spotted Sergeant Mike Harold dragging a wounded man. Private First Class Chen, blood soaking through his pant leg, face white with shock. "Get him stable!" Dalton shouted over the gunfire. Another RPG. This one hit the valley floor ahead, cratering the only clear exit route in a cascade of rubble and flame. Smoke poured across the kill zone. They were boxed. Dalton's mind raced through tactical options at light speed. Return fire. Maneuver. Call for support. Suppress and bound. But every option collapsed under the reality screaming at him from every direction. They were in a pre-sighted kill box. The enemy had range cards, interlocking fields of fire, probable indirect fire positions already dialed in. This wasn't a hasty ambush. This was an execution. 2-6, we're pinned! That was Staff Sergeant Rourke, voice tight but controlled. "I've got 3 wounded, 1 urgent." Dalton pressed himself against the rock, forcing his breathing to slow. His radio crackled with overlapping transmissions, casualty reports, ammo counts, frantic calls for air support. He keyed the command net. "Viper Main, this is Reaper 2-6, troops in contact, taking effective fire from elevated positions, multiple wounded, requesting immediate CAS, and medevac, grid follows. 2-6, Viper Main, be advised all rotary wing assets are grounded due to weather over Bagram. Fixed wing is 30 minutes out." 30 minutes. They'd all be dead in 10. Dalton slammed a fresh magazine into his rifle and leaned out, acquiring targets. He saw muzzle flashes along the ridge, 200 meters up, maybe more. Too far for effective carbine fire, but he sent rounds anyway, forcing heads down, buying seconds. Beside him, Ortega was doing the same. Controlled pairs, breathing through the chaos. "How'd they know?" Ortega shouted between shots. "How the hell did they know we'd be here?" Good question. Terrible time to ask it. Another burst of PKM fire tore across their position. Dalton heard someone scream, high and sharp and cut short. His radio barked. 2-6, this is 3-1. Corporal McKenzie is down. He's not moving. Can you reach him? Negative. He's in the open. We'll get shredded. Dalton's jaw clenched. The math was brutal and simple. They were outgunned, outmaneuvered, and running out of time. Ammunition expenditure was catastrophic. Casualties mounting. No air support. No reinforcements. He'd led these men into a trap, and now he was watching them die. Then, from somewhere impossibly high above the firefight, a single rifle shot cracked across the valley. Different sound, sharper, cleaner. One of the PKM guns went silent. Dalton's head snapped up, scanning the ridgelines. "Who fired that?" Ortega was already looking. "Wasn't us. Wrong caliber. Sounded like..." Another shot. Same distinct crack. A second enemy fighter dropped, visible for just a moment as he tumbled backward off a rock ledge. Confusion rippled through the ambush line. Dalton could hear it, shouting in Pashto, frantic and disorganized. Enemy fire slackened for 3, maybe 4 seconds. "What the hell is happening?" Rourke's voice over the net, bewildered. Dalton didn't answer. He was staring at the high ground, trying to trace the angle of those shots. Somewhere northwest, far. Maybe 300 meters up the opposite slope, hidden in terrain the predator had called clear. Third shot. An enemy fighter who'd been moving to flank their position jerked sideways and collapsed. The Taliban fighters were scrambling now, no longer focused on the Rangers below. They were looking for the new threat, scanning, shouting, burning ammo into empty ridgelines. 2-6. Ortega's voice was quiet, almost reverent. Someone's up there. I know. Someone's helping us. Dalton keyed his radio, broadcasting to the entire patrol. All Reaper elements, we have unknown friendly fire from elevated position northwest. Do not return fire in that direction. Stand by to move on my command. He didn't know who was up there. He didn't know why. But right now, survival trumped curiosity. 4th shot. 5th. 6th. Each one precisely spaced. No spray and pray. No suppression. Just deletion. A fighter would appear, and then he wouldn't. Clean, methodical, unhurried. The enemy's discipline started fracturing. Return fire became erratic. Panicked. One group tried to reposition, 3 men running along the ridge, and all 3 went down in the span of 8 seconds. Whoever was shooting had turned this from an execution into a hunting ground, and the Rangers were no longer the prey. "Rourke!" Dalton shouted. "Can you move? Affirm! We've got a break in the fire!" "On my mark, bound forward 20 meters to that rock cluster. 3, 2. The rifle cracked again. Another enemy position went dark. "Go, go, go!" Rourke's element sprinted forward in a low crouch, boots pounding stone, weapons up. They covered the distance in seconds and dropped into cover without taking fire. It worked. Dalton's mind shifted gears. They were still trapped, still wounded, still outgunned, but the equation had changed. Before, movement meant death. Now there was a rhythm. "All elements," Dalton transmitted, voice steady and cold. "We move on the shot. When that rifle speaks, we advance. When it doesn't, we freeze. Acknowledge. 3-1, copy. 4-2, solid copy. Alpha 6 understood." Dalton watched the ridgeline, waiting. 10 seconds passed. Then, crack. "Move!" His element bounded forward, 15 meters. New cover, no incoming fire. The enemy was fracturing. Dalton could feel it. That shift when confidence bleeds out of a fight and survival instinct takes over. They were no longer hunting. They were being hunted. Another shot from the high ground. Another collapse. Again! Move! They leapfrogged through the kill zone like that. Fire and movement synced to an invisible metronome. Every time the mystery rifle spoke, the Rangers surged forward. Terrain that had been a death trap 10 minutes ago became navigable. Dalton's radio crackled. 2-6, this is Chen. I can move. Tourniquet's holding. Stay with Harold. We're coming to you. The enemy fire was unraveling completely now. Wild bursts into empty air, someone screaming orders in Pashto, voice high with fear. Dalton didn't speak the language, but panic sounded the same everywhere. Then came a shot that shouldn't have been possible. A target appeared near the upper ridge, 800 meters out, maybe more. Moving fast. Angled downslope. The wind was gusting hard enough that Dalton could feel it buffeting against his body armor. The rifle answered anyway. 1 round. The target dropped. Ortega whispered, "Jesus Christ." Silence crashed down like a guillotine. No more muzzle flashes, no more incoming rounds. Just wind and the metallic taste of gunpowder and the ringing in Dalton's ears that felt like it might never stop. He held position for 30 seconds. 60. Scanning. Waiting for the second wave. The hidden reserve. The backup ambush. Nothing came. "Cease fire," Dalton ordered quietly. "Maintain security. Get accountability and casualty status." The reports came back piecemeal. 3 urgent wounded. 2 priority. No KIA. Ammunition down to 20% across the board. They'd survived. Barely. Dalton rose slowly from cover, rifle up, scanning the high ground where those impossible shots had come from. Nothing moved, just rock and scrub and shadow. "Sir," Ortega was pointing. A figure had appeared on the ridgeline, distant, alone, moving down the slope toward them with steady, unhurried steps, no weapon visible, hands empty. Dalton's finger stayed indexed along his rifle's frame, ready but not committed. The figure descended through loose scree and over boulders, never stumbling, never hesitating. It took 3 minutes to close half the distance. That's when Dalton could make out details through his rifle optic. Slim build, long dark hair tied back, civilian clothes, hiking pants, a worn jacket, boots that had seen serious miles. A woman, young, maybe mid-20s, carrying a rifle slung across her back that looked like it cost more than Dalton's truck. "Hold fire," Dalton ordered quietly. "Everyone stay calm." Rourke appeared at his shoulder. "Is that—" "I don't know what that is." She reached the valley floor and walked toward them with the kind of calm that only came from absolute certainty. No hesitation, no fear. Like she'd done this 100 times before. Dalton stepped forward to meet her, keeping his rifle lowered but ready. Up close, she looked even younger than he'd thought. Lean face, dark eyes that tracked everything and gave away nothing, hands scarred and calloused. She stopped 3 meters away. "You're Reaper 2-6, she said. Not a question. American accent. Pacific Northwest, maybe. "Who the hell are you?" Dalton asked. She glanced past him, scanning the casualties. "Your man on the left? Chen, tourniquet's too loose. He's still losing blood. And whoever tied off Mackenzie used a cravat instead of a cat. That's not going to hold if he moves." Dalton blinked. "Answer the question." She looked back at him. Something flickered in her eyes. Not quite amusement, but close. "Someone who was in the area," she said. "Bullshit." Dalton's voice went hard. "Nobody's in the area out here. This is Taliban country. You're either military, agency, or you've got a death wish. So which is it?" She was already moving past him, kneeling beside Chen before anyone could stop her. Her hands worked fast, loosening the tourniquet, repositioning it higher on his thigh, cranking the windlass tight until Chen gasped. "Better," she said quietly, patting his shoulder. "You're good. Stay awake." Chen stared at her like she'd materialized out of thin air. "Who?" "Overwatch," she said. She moved to Mackenzie next. The corporal was unconscious, pale, breathing shallow. She checked his airway, examined the hasty bandage someone had applied to his shoulder wound, then pulled a proper combat tourniquet from her pack and applied it with practiced efficiency. Dalton watched, mind racing. Overwatch. That could mean anything or nothing, but the way she moved, no wasted motion, no hesitation, that was training, high-level training. "You need to identify yourself," Dalton said. "Right now." She finished with Mackenzie and stood, wiping blood off her hands onto her pants. "My name doesn't matter," she said. "But if you want confirmation I'm not Taliban, check your command net. Tell them Revenant is active." "Revenant!" Dalton repeated the word like it tasted wrong. "They'll know." Before he could press further, Ortega called out, "Sir, we've got movement on the South Ridge." Everyone's weapons came up. The woman didn't even flinch. She pulled a small pair of binoculars from her jacket and glassed the ridgeline. "Scouts?" she said after a moment, "checking to see if anyone's left. They'll report back, then you'll get hit again. Probably mortars this time." "How do you know that?" She lowered the binoculars and looked at him. "Because that's what I do." Dalton's radio crackled. 2-6 Viper Main, be advised, medevac is inbound, ETA 12 minutes. Can you mark LZ? "Affirm. Marking now." He switched channels. "All elements. Pop smoke on the LZ. Prepare for extract." The woman was already walking away. "Wait." Dalton moved after her. "Where are you going?" "Back." "Back where?" She didn't answer, just kept walking. "We need to debrief you," Dalton called. "Command's going to want to know—" "They know enough," she said without turning around. "Who deployed you? JSOC? CIA? SAD?" She stopped, turned halfway. The wind caught her hair and pulled it across her face. She didn't brush it away. "Nobody deployed me," she said quietly. "I was already here." "Doing what?" For the first time, something like emotion crossed her face. Sadness, maybe. Or regret. "Cleaning up mistakes," she said. Then she reached into her jacket and pulled out a small waterproof notepad, walked back and pressed it into Dalton's hand. "Grid coordinates," she said. "Firing positions they used today, probable supply cache locations, patrol patterns, communication schedules, everything I've mapped over the last 2 weeks." Dalton stared at the notepad. "You've been watching them." "Watching everything." "Why didn't you report this through channels?" Her smile was thin and bitter. "I did. 3 weeks ago." Got told the intel was inconclusive and the mission was a go. She nodded toward the valley walls. This was the conclusion. The pieces started clicking together in Dalton's head. You tried to warn command about this ambush. I told them Karez Pass was compromised. I gave them alternate routes. I flagged the Taliban buildup. Her voice stayed level, but something cold moved behind her eyes. They sent you through anyway. Dalton felt something twist in his gut. Why? You'd have to ask them. The distant thump of rotor blades echoed through the valley. The medevac was close. Come with us, Dalton said suddenly. You saved our lives. You deserve— I don't need recognition, she interrupted. I need you to learn from this. She tapped the notepad in his hand. Study that. Understand how they think, how they plan, how they're patient enough to spend weeks setting a trap because they know you'll take the shortcut. And what are you going to do? She looked back toward the mountains. What I've always done. Which is? Make sure the next patrol doesn't walk into the same mistake. Dalton wanted to argue, wanted to demand answers, explanations, accountability. But the helicopter was cresting the ridge now, and his wounded needed extraction. And this woman, whoever she really was, had already given him more than he had any right to expect. At least tell me your name, he said. She considered that for a long moment. Call me what the Taliban calls me, she finally said. Ghost. Then she turned and walked back toward the high ground, moving with that same unhurried confidence, like she had all the time in the world. Dalton watched her climb until she disappeared into the broken terrain. Sir? Ortega appeared at his elbow. The hell just happened? Dalton looked down at the notepad in his hand, opened it. Inside were grid coordinates, sketch terrain maps, observation notes written in precise, economical handwriting. Intelligence gold. I don't know, he said quietly. The helicopter touched down in a storm of rotor wash and dust. Rangers moved with controlled urgency, loading casualties, forming security. Dalton transmitted final coordinates to command, then climbed aboard the Blackhawk. As they lifted off, he looked back at the valley one last time. Karez Pass fell away below them, looking peaceful in the morning light. But Dalton knew better now. He knew what lived in those mountains. Not just the enemy, something else. Someone who'd been forgotten, dismissed, written off, and who'd decided to keep fighting anyway, alone, in the silence, where no one was watching. And as the helicopter banked toward base, Dalton made a decision. He was going to find out who she really was. What had happened to put her out here, operating in the shadows without support or recognition? Because soldiers like that, the ones who saved lives when nobody asked them to, who stayed in the fight when they could have walked away, those were the ones who deserved answers, even if they didn't want them. The notepad felt heavy in his hands. On the last page, written in small, careful letters, was a single line. The valley remembers. Make sure you do too. Dalton closed his eyes and leaned back against the vibrating hull of the helicopter. They'd survived. But the questions were just beginning, and somewhere in those mountains, the woman called Ghost was already moving to her next position. Watching, waiting, ready to do it all over again. Because that's what ghosts did. They haunted the places where the living made mistakes. And they made sure those mistakes didn't become graves. The Blackhawk touched down at FOB Sharana with a hard jolt that rattled Dalton's teeth. Dust devils spiraled across the landing pad as the rear ramp dropped and medics swarmed the wounded. Chen was conscious, giving thumbs up through the pain. Mackenzie was still out, but breathing steady. The others walked off under their own power, faces hollow, with the peculiar exhaustion that came after surviving something that should have killed you. Dalton stood on the tarmac watching his men get triaged, the notepad still clenched in his fist. The wind tasted like diesel fuel and burned garbage. Normal FOB atmosphere. Safe, controlled, the opposite of everything that had just happened. Captain Hayes, a voice cut through the rotor noise. Dalton turned. Major Cassidy stood 5 meters away, arms crossed, expression unreadable behind Oakley sunglasses. He was flanked by 2 men Dalton didn't recognize. Civilian clothes, tactical watches, the kind of bland faces that screamed agency work. Sir, Dalton said, straightening despite every muscle in his body screaming for rest. Cassidy walked closer, voice low. Debrief. 15 minutes. TOC. Don't talk to anyone else first. My men need... Your men are being handled. You need to explain what the hell happened out there. Cassidy's jaw was tight. And why our predator feed showed you getting saved by someone who isn't supposed to exist. The two civilians hadn't moved, just stood there watching with the patience of people who got paid to wait. Dalton felt something cold settle in his stomach. Who are they? People with questions, Cassidy said. Move. The Tactical Operations Center was a plywood box packed with computer terminals and flat screens showing drone feeds from across the province. It smelled like coffee and sweat and the particular staleness of a room that never saw sunlight. The screens cast everything in blue-white glow. Dalton sat at a metal table across from Cassidy and the two civilians. One of them, mid-40s, graying temples, wedding ring worn smooth, opened a laptop without introducing himself. The other just leaned against the wall and watched. From the top, Cassidy said. Everything. Dalton walked them through it. The approach to Carez Pass. Ortega's instinct that something was wrong, the ambush, the casualties. Then the shots from the high ground that turned the fight. And you didn't call in the fire? The civilian with the laptop asked. No. Didn't coordinate with any adjacent units? There were no adjacent units. So someone just started shooting, out of nowhere. Dalton met his eyes. Someone saved my men's lives. The civilian typed something. Describe her. How do you know it was a woman? Because we have thermal signatures from the predator. Describe her. Dalton did. Young, dark hair, civilian clothes, military bearing, carried herself like someone who'd been doing this for years. And she called herself Ghost, Cassidy added, consulting his own notes. She said the Taliban called her that, Dalton corrected. The civilian at the wall finally spoke. His voice was soft, almost gentle. What did she tell you about why she was there? That she was already in the area, that she'd warned command about the ambush 3 weeks ago and got ignored. Silence. The kind that meant he'd hit something true. The laptop civilian glanced at his partner, some unspoken communication passing between them. Then he closed the computer and stood. Captain Hayes, you're going to forget this conversation happened. You're going to forget that woman existed. Your after-action report will state that you received effective fire from an unknown friendly element, origin undetermined, which allowed your patrol to break contact and extract. No names. No speculation. Are we clear? No, Dalton said flatly. We're not. Cassidy's eyes widened fractionally. Captain, that woman saved 12 American lives. She gave me intelligence that could prevent future ambushes. And you want me to pretend she doesn't exist? Dalton pulled out the notepad and slapped it on the table. She knew that Valley was compromised. She reported it. Someone buried her warning and sent us in anyway. So before I forget anything, I want to know who made that call. The wall civilian pushed off and stepped forward. Up close, Dalton could see the small scar above his eyebrow, the way his hands stayed relaxed at his sides, the posture of someone who'd been in worse rooms than this. You really want to go down this road, Captain? I want accountability. What you want is to feel like today meant something other than bad luck and good timing. The man's voice stayed soft, but there was steel underneath. But some questions don't have answers you're going to like, and some people operate in spaces where recognition would get them killed. She deserves better than being erased. She chose this. We didn't force it on her. Why? Dalton leaned forward. What happened that put her out there alone? The man studied him for a long moment. Then he pulled out a chair and sat down across from Dalton, the movement deliberate and heavy. 5 years ago, he said quietly, we had an asset in Kunar province. Intelligence specialist. Brilliant tactical mind, could read terrain and enemy patterns like most people read street signs. She was embedded with a special forces team running interdiction ops against Taliban supply lines. Dalton listened, pieces starting to click together. There was an operation. High-value target. Compound in the mountains. She analyzed the approach routes and told her team the place was a trap. Command overruled her assessment, said the intelligence was solid and the window was closing. The man's jaw tightened. They went in anyway. Walked into an ambush that killed 8 operators and wounded 5 more. She was one of the wounded. Jesus, Dalton breathed. After the investigation, she was cleared of any wrongdoing, but she couldn't let it go. Kept digging. Found out the intelligence that sent them in was compromised. Taliban had fed us the location knowing we'd bite. Someone in the chain should have caught it. Didn't. The man paused. She made noise about it, official complaints, wanted accountability. And they buried her, Dalton said. They transferred her stateside, desk job, told her to move on. The man's expression was flat. She disappeared 6 months later. Next thing we know, she's operating independently in the Hindu Kush. No official sanction, no support, just her, a rifle, and a very long list of grudges. Cassidy spoke up, voice careful. We've tried to bring her in, multiple times. She won't come. Because she doesn't trust the system that got her people killed, Dalton said. The wall civilian nodded slowly. And because out there, on her own terms, she's doing more good than she ever did inside the bureaucracy. She maps enemy movements, disrupts operations, saves patrols that stumble into bad situations. He tapped the notepad on the table. And she leaves breadcrumbs for people smart enough to use them. Dalton looked down at the notepad. So you let her operate. We don't let her do anything. We can't control her. But we don't actively stop her either because she's been right about every goddamn thing she's warned us about. The man stood. Including today. What's her real name? That's not relevant anymore. It is to me. The man walked to the door, paused with his hand on the frame. If you want to honor what she did, Captain, you don't dig into who she was. You learn from what she taught you. That notepad contains more tactical intelligence than we've gathered in 3 months. Use it. Keep your men alive. That's what she would want. Then he was gone, his partner following without a word. Cassidy waited until the door closed before speaking. They're right, you know. Some battles you don't win by fighting them head on. And some you don't win by staying silent, Dalton said. He left the TOC and walked across the compound to the medical tent. Inside, Chen was getting an IV while a doctor examined his leg. Mackenzie was awake now, groggy, but responsive. The others were scattered on cots, too wired to sleep despite the exhaustion. Ortega spotted Dalton and sat up. Sir, who was she? The whole tent went quiet. Everyone watching. Dalton could lie, could follow orders, could make this simple. Instead, he said, someone who gave a damn when it would have been easier not to. He spent the next 2 hours going through the notepad with Ortega and Rourke, translating the observations into actionable intelligence. Enemy patrol patterns emerged. Supply routes. Communication schedules. Probable leadership locations. It was surveillance work that should have taken a full team weeks to compile. She'd done it alone. This is insane, Rourke muttered, tracing his finger along a sketched map showing overlapping fields of fire around 3 different valleys. She's documented their entire defensive strategy. And she was right about all of it, Ortega added. We walked straight into the exact scenario she warned about. Dalton didn't respond. He was staring at a note scrawled in the margin of 1 page. They're not stupid, they're patient. Don't confuse the two. His radio crackled. All personnel stand by for emergency formation in 30 minutes. Command brief to follow. The 3 of them exchanged glances. That can't be good, Rourke said. The formation was held in the motor pool, 200 soldiers standing in loose ranks while Major Cassidy addressed them from the hood of a Humvee. His voice carried across the crowd, amplified by the peculiar acoustics of the space. At 1600 hours today, multiple patrols across the province reported contact with Taliban forces in coordinated ambush positions. Casualty reports are still coming in, but initial numbers suggest this was a planned, large-scale operation designed to maximize American losses during our patrol rotations. Murmurs rippled through the formation. Dalton felt his chest tighten. Captain Hayes' patrol in Carez Pass was the only element to break contact without suffering KYA. Every other unit engaged took fatalities. Cassidy's expression was grim. We're suspending all routine patrols pending intelligence review and route reassessment. Someone behind Dalton whispered, How'd they coordinate this? Because they've been watching us, Dalton said quietly, not turning around. Learning our patterns. Waiting for the right day. The formation dismissed. Dalton walked back to his hooch, a plywood box with a cot and footlocker, and sat in the dark thinking. She'd tried to warn them, not just about Carez Pass, about the entire operational pattern being compromised, and she'd been ignored because she wasn't official anymore. Wasn't credible. Was just a ghost screaming into the void. Until today, when her screaming had saved lives. Dalton's laptop sat on his footlocker. He opened it, logged into the secure network, and pulled up after-action reports from the other patrols that had been hit. 3 KIA at Checkpoint Phoenix, 2 at FOB Tillman, 4 during a convoy through the Waygal Valley. All within the same 4-hour window, all in locations that could have been predicted if someone had been mapping enemy buildup. Someone had been. They just hadn't been listening to her. He pulled out the notepad again, flipping to the back pages. There, in small handwriting, was a list of grid coordinates with dates beside them. Future ambush sites, he realized. Predictions based on pattern analysis. One of them matched the Waygal Valley convoy route. She'd known, and she'd documented it, and men had died anyway. Dalton's hand shook as he closed the notepad, not from fear, from rage. 3 days later, he was summoned back to the TOC. This time it was just Cassidy, looking 10 years older than he had at the beginning of the week. "We've analyzed the intelligence you recovered," Cassidy said without preamble. "It's solid, more than solid. It's the most comprehensive enemy assessment we've had in months." He paused. "Higher command wants to know where you got it." "I told you already." "They want confirmation, verification of source." "The source saved my life and doesn't want recognition. That should be enough." Cassidy rubbed his eyes. "Captain, this isn't about giving someone a medal. This is about validating intelligence before we base operational decisions on it. If this came from a compromised source, it didn't. How do you know?" "Because she had nothing to gain by helping us. No payoff, no agenda. She did it because it was the right thing to do." Dalton's voice was hard. "Which apparently makes her unique around here." Cassidy's expression shifted, something between sympathy and warning. "Be very careful, Captain." "Of what? Telling the truth?" "Of making this personal. You survived a bad day. Your men survived. Take the win and move on. We survived because someone who got screwed by this system came back to fix our mistakes anyway. That's not a win. That's a condemnation." Cassidy leaned back in his chair. "What do you want me to say? That we failed her? That the system is broken? I can't fix that. Neither can you. But we can stop pretending it's not happening." Silence hung between them for a long moment. Then Cassidy pulled a folder from his desk drawer and slid it across the table. "This doesn't leave this room," he said quietly. Dalton opened it. Inside was a personnel file, heavily redacted. Most of the text was blacked out, but he could see fragments. A name, also redacted. Service record, multiple commendations, psychological evaluation noting persistent survivor's guilt and institutional distrust. Assignment history showing deployment after deployment until the trail went cold. The last entry was dated 18 months ago. Subject failed to report for reassignment. Current whereabouts unknown. Case transferred to AWOL investigation. Clipped to the back was a single photograph, grainy and slightly out of focus. A woman in AC-US, standing beside a Special Forces team somewhere mountainous. Her face was partially obscured by shadow, but Dalton recognized the eyes. The same eyes that had looked at him in Carez Pass and said, "Cleaning up mistakes." "She was one of ours," Dalton said softly. "She is one of ours," Cassidy corrected, "even if she doesn't think so anymore." "Have you tried to bring her back?" "Every way we know how. Messages left at dead drops. Radio broadcasts on frequencies she might monitor. Even sent a team to try to make contact." Cassidy shook his head. "She's a ghost for a reason. She doesn't want to be found." Dalton stared at the photograph. "What was the operation that went bad? The one that killed her team?" Cassidy hesitated, then sighed. "Compound raid in the Korangal. Intelligence said it was a Taliban logistics hub. Turned out to be a kill box. The survivors said she'd warned them it was wrong, but the op had already been greenlit at the highest levels. After the investigation cleared her, she started digging into who'd provided the original intel. Got too close to something someone didn't want uncovered." "Who?" "That's above my clearance. And yours." Cassidy closed the folder. "The point is, she made powerful people uncomfortable, so they sidelined her And when she wouldn't stay sidelined, they let her disappear. That's not justice. No, it's bureaucracy. Cassidy stood. You want my advice? Use her intelligence. Save lives with it. That's the only revenge she'd care about. Dalton left the TOC with the notepad feeling heavier than before. Not from the weight of paper, but from the weight of what it represented. A woman who'd lost everything because she'd been right when powerful people needed her to be wrong. Who'd come back anyway, without support or recognition, to keep doing the work that had cost her so much. That night he couldn't sleep. He lay on his cot staring at the plywood ceiling, listening to mortars thump in the distance. Outgoing fire. American guns pounding suspected Taliban positions based on intelligence that might or might not be accurate. He thought about her out there in the mountains, alone, watching, documenting patterns that could save lives if anyone bothered to listen. His radio sitting on the footlocker suddenly crackled to life. Any station this net? Any station this net? Looking for Reaper 26, over. Dalton sat up fast, grabbed the radio. The transmission was faint, heavy with static, coming through on a frequency that wasn't part of their normal comms plan. Reaper 26, go ahead, he transmitted. Silence. Then, through the static, you used the notepad. Her voice, unmistakable even through the distortion. Dalton's heart rate spiked. How did you? I watched the pattern changes, new patrol routes, different timing. Someone actually read what I wrote. A pause. Thank you. You saved 12 lives. I should be thanking you. You already did, by listening. Another pause, longer this time. There's more coming, bigger operation. They're moving supplies into the Petch Valley, staging for something major. I've been tracking it for weeks. Send me the intel. I'll make sure it gets to the right people. Static filled the channel. For a moment he thought he'd lost her. Then, I did that once. Got people killed. I won't make that mistake again. This is different. Is it? Her voice was quiet, almost sad. Or are you just the next good man who's going to trust a system that doesn't deserve it? Then what do you want me to do? Survive. Keep your men alive. That's all anyone can do out here. That's not enough. It's all we have. Dalton closed his eyes, choosing his words carefully. They showed me your file. What happened to your team? What they did to you afterward. The silence this time felt different, heavier. Then you understand why I can't come back, she finally said. I understand why you think you can't, but I also understand that you're still fighting for us anyway, which means part of you still believes this matters. Belief doesn't stop bullets, Captain. No, but it's why you're still out there pulling triggers when you could have walked away. He took a breath. You want accountability? Help me build a case. Real documentation. Patterns they can't ignore. Make them listen. They won't. Then we make enough noise that they can't pretend they didn't hear. Long silence. Wind noise over the channel. Then, so quiet he almost missed it. You don't know what you're asking. I'm asking you to trust someone. One more time, even though you have every reason not to. That's a lot. I know. He could hear her breathing over the static, slow, controlled, the breath of someone making a decision that would change everything. There's a village, she finally said, 12 clicks northeast of your position, abandoned. Taliban uses it as a waypoint. There's a well at the center with loose stones on the western side. Tomorrow, at 0300, there'll be a package there. Everything I've mapped over the last 6 months, frequencies, personnel, network analysis, all of it. I'll be there. Come alone. And if this goes sideways, you never heard from me. Understood. The channel went dead. Dalton sat in the dark holding the radio, his pulse hammering in his ears. This was it. The line between following orders and doing what was right. Between playing it safe and taking a risk for someone who'd already risked everything. He thought about his men, about Chen and Mackenzie and all the others who'd walked out of that valley alive, about the patrols that hadn't been so lucky, about the future ambushes waiting to happen if someone didn't connect the dots. Then he thought about her, alone in those mountains, still fighting a war everyone had told her to forget. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. He checked his watch, 2,200 hours, 5 hours until the meeting. He grabbed his kit and started preparing. Whatever happened next, he was all in, because some debts couldn't be repaid with paperwork and procedure. Some required you to step into the dark and trust that the ghost waiting there was on your side, even if nobody else believed she existed. Dalton slipped out of the FOB at 0200 hours through a drainage culvert that everyone pretended didn't exist. The guard rotation had a 6-minute gap on the eastern perimeter. Known, tolerated, used by soldiers who needed to piss without walking half a click to the latrines. Tonight it served a different purpose. He moved through the dark wearing nods that turned the world into grainy green geometry. No radio, no backup, just his rifle, a sidearm, and the knowledge that if this went wrong, nobody would come looking until morning formation. The village sat in a shallow depression between two ridges, invisible from the FOB. Dalton approached from the north, moving slow, scanning for heat signatures or disturbed earth that might indicate IEDs. The Taliban were known to booby-trap abandoned structures. She had to know that, which meant either she'd cleared the approach or this was the test. See if he was smart enough to survive the walk. The village materialized out of the darkness like a memory of civilization. Mud brick walls crumbling back into the earth. Empty doorways that watched like dead eyes. No lights, no movement. The wind moved through hollow spaces and made sounds that could have been voices if you weren't careful with your imagination. Dalton found the well at the center of what used to be the main square. Stone rim, wooden crossbeam rotted and hanging at an angle. The western side showed recent disturbance, loose rocks stacked in a pattern that looked natural but wasn't. He knelt and moved the stones carefully. Underneath was a waterproof bag, military grade, vacuum sealed. Inside, 3 notebooks, a thumb drive, and a folded map marked with symbols he didn't immediately recognize. "Don't move." The voice came from behind him, not her voice. Male, accented, Pashto speaker using English. Dalton froze, hands visible, rifle slung. His mind raced through options, none good. "Stand up, slow." He rose carefully, turned. 3 men emerged from the ruins, Akay's chest rigs, faces wrapped in shemogs. Taliban fighters, close enough that missing would be harder than hitting. The lead fighter stepped forward. "You are far from base, American." "Just passing through," Dalton said evenly. With no radio, no patrol, at 3 in the morning. The fighter's English was good, educated, probably a commander. "You meet someone, yes?" Dalton said nothing. "The ghost woman. We know she used this place." The fighter gestured at the well. "We wait. She come or you come. Both are good." "She's not coming." "Then why you here?" "Personal business." The fighter laughed. "Personal business in Taliban territory. You are very stupid or very brave." He moved closer, examining Dalton's face in the starlight. "I think stupid." One of the other fighters said something rapid in Pashto. The leader responded, then turned back to Dalton. "My brothers say we should kill you now. Send message." He tilted his head. "But I think maybe you have value. American officer, alone, meeting the ghost. This is interesting story." Dalton's muscles coiled. 3 targets, 10 meters spread. The lead fighter was closest, but the other 2 had angles. If he went for his rifle, he'd take at least 2 rounds before the weapon cleared his chest. If he went for the sidearm, a rifle cracked from somewhere in the ruins. The fighter to Dalton's left dropped, his AK clattering against stone. The other 2 spun, weapons rising, searching for the shooter. Another crack. The second fighter went down. The leader dove behind the well, pulling Dalton with him, used him as a shield, AK pressed against Dalton's spine. "Ghost woman," he shouted into the darkness. "I have your American friend. You want him alive, you show yourself." Silence. Just wind and the ragged breathing of 2 men pressed against cold stone. "I know you're there," the fighter called. "I know you watch. Always watching, never fighting close. Coward woman with rifle." Dalton felt the barrel dig harder into his back, felt the fighter's heart hammering through the tactical vest. This wasn't a professional soldier. This was someone angry and scared and making emotional decisions. "Listen to me," Dalton said quietly. "You're not getting out of here. Let me go and run. That's your only move. Shut your mouth. She's already got the angle. She's just waiting to see if you're smart or stupid. I said shut. The fighter's radio crackled, a voice speaking rapid Pashto, tone urgent. The fighter responded, keeping the rifle on Dalton but his attention dividing. Bad tactical decision. Dalton caught fragments, something about movement, multiple contacts, ambush. The fighter's grip loosened fractionally. Your friends come? No friends, Dalton said. Just her. Realization crossed the fighter's face a moment before the shot came. Not aimed at him, aimed at the stone 6 inches from his head. The round sparked off rock, and the fighter flinched, instinct overriding discipline, turning away from the impact. Dalton moved, dropped his weight, twisted, drove his elbow back into the fighter's solar plexus. Air whooshed out. The AK swung wild. Dalton caught the barrel, redirected it up, and the fighter's panicked shot went skyward. Then Dalton was moving, rolling away, reaching for his sidearm. The rifle cracked again, and the fighter collapsed. Dalton came up in a crouch, Glock drawn, scanning the ruins. Nothing moved. His ears rang from the gunfire. His hands were steady, but his pulse was hammering. Clear left, her voice called from somewhere in the dark. Calm. Professional. Clear right, Dalton responded automatically, falling into patrol protocol. She materialized from a doorway 30 meters away, rifle slung, moving fast and low. Reached him in seconds. You good? She asked, checking him over with eyes that missed nothing. Yeah, you. Better now. She moved to the well, grabbed the waterproof bag, handed it to Dalton. We need to move. Those radio calls weren't random. They've got people coming. How many? Enough. She was already moving toward the northern edge of the village. Follow me. Step where I step. They moved through the ruins in tactical silence. Dalton matched her pace, her rhythm, trusting that the path she took was clear. Behind them, voices called out in Pashto. Flashlights swept the village square. She led him into a dry creek bed that cut between the ridges. They moved hunched below the rim, boots quiet on loose stones. Half a click out, she stopped and pulled a small device from her jacket. Pressed a button. The village erupted. Not IEDs, flashbangs, dozens of them, positioned throughout the ruins, all detonating in sequence. The night lit up white, and the sound rolled across the valley like thunder. Distraction, she said. Bought us maybe 10 minutes. They kept moving. The terrain rose, rocky and steep. Dalton's legs burned, but he didn't slow. Behind them, the chaos at the village continued. Shouts, more flashlights, the confusion of fighters trying to figure out what just hit them. She took them up a goat path that barely qualified as a trail. 15 minutes of hard climbing. At the top, she stopped and turned, pulling out compact binoculars. They're reorganizing, she said, watching the village below. Sending out search teams, 3 groups, maybe 4. Can they track us? Not if we keep moving. She lowered the binoculars and looked at him. That was stupid, what you did back there. Coming alone? Trusting me. She secured the binoculars. You could have been walking into a trap. Was I? No, but you didn't know that. Dalton adjusted the waterproof bag's strap. I knew enough. She studied him for a long moment. You're not like the others. The others didn't watch you save their lives. Plenty of people watched. Didn't make them believers. She started walking again, heading deeper into the high country. Command's going to ask where you got that intel. Let them ask. They'll push, threaten, maybe even charge you with unauthorized ops. Worth it. She stopped and turned. Why? You don't know me. Don't owe me anything. Why risk your career for this? Dalton thought about how to answer that, settled on the truth. Because what happened to you was wrong. Because good people got killed when someone should have listened. And because I'm tired of watching the system protect its mistakes instead of fixing them. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite trust, but maybe the possibility of it. What's in the bag will burn careers, she said quietly. Not just low-level scapegoats. Field-grade officers. Maybe higher. People who made decisions that got soldiers killed and then covered their tracks. Good. You say that now. Wait until you're sitting across from lawyers and career officers who'll do anything to make this go away. She moved closer. They'll come after you, hard. They'll dig into your record, find anything they can use. They'll isolate you, Make sure nobody wants to be associated with the troublemaker. Let them try. This isn't bravado, Captain. This is your life, your future, everything you've worked for. What's your name? Dalton asked suddenly. She blinked. What? Your real name, not your call sign, not what they labeled you in some redacted file. Who are you? For a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, so quietly he almost missed it. Sarah. Sarah Vance. Sarah. He extended his hand. I'm Dalton Hayes, and I'm not backing down from this. She looked at his hand like it was a foreign object. Then, slowly, she shook it. Her grip was strong, calloused, real. You understand what you're starting? She asked. A fight worth having, against people who've been winning for a long time. Then it's overdue for them to lose. She almost smiled. Almost. You're either the bravest man I've met or the dumbest. Can it be both? This time she did smile. Small, brief, but real. They kept moving through the high country as dawn began bleeding into the eastern sky. Sarah navigated through terrain that would have taken Dalton hours to cross, finding paths that barely existed, reading the ground like a language written specifically for her. The thumb drive, she said as they walked. That's the critical piece. Everything else is supporting documentation, but the drive has voice recordings, meeting transcripts, operational orders, direct evidence of people falsifying intelligence reports to justify missions they wanted to run. Who? You'll see. But once you plug that drive in, there's no going back. The moment you access those files, they'll know someone has them. How? Because I stole them from a classified system. They're tagged, monitored. She glanced at him. When you open them, alarms go off. People in very high places will start asking very pointed questions about how Captain Dalton Hayes got his hands on material he should never have been able to touch. Dalton absorbed that. So this isn't just about exposing the truth. It's about surviving the exposure. Now you're getting it. They reached an outcropping that overlooked the valley. In the distance, Dalton could see FOB Sharana, a small cluster of lights and structures that represented safety, order, the familiar world of military hierarchy and chain of command. Going back there with this evidence would change everything. There's another option, Sarah said, reading his thoughts. You give me back the bag. Forget this happened. Go back to your men and your missions and your career. I keep operating in the shadows. Nothing changes. Except more soldiers die walking into ambushes that could have been prevented. Probably. That's not an option. It's the smart option. Since when did smart and right become the same thing? Dalton turned to face her fully. You spent the last 6 months documenting this, living alone in hostile territory, risking your life every day. You did that for a reason. I did it because I couldn't let go. No, you did it because you still believe in what this is supposed to be about. Protecting people, serving something bigger than yourself. That didn't die when your team did. Her jaw tightened. You don't know what died. You're right, I don't. But I know what's still alive. Whatever part of you that came back to save my patrol. That left intelligence knowing it might help. That showed up tonight even though you could have just walked away. He gestured at the FOB in the distance. That's not someone who's given up. That's someone who's waiting for somebody else to care as much as she does. Sarah was quiet for a long time. The sun crept higher, painting the mountains in shades of copper and gold. If we do this, she finally said, we do it right. No half measures, no political games. We build an airtight case and we drop it where it can't be buried. Agreed. And when they come after you, and they will, you don't fold, you don't compromise. You see it through. I will. She pulled a satellite phone from her pack. Military issue, probably liberated from a supply drop. Then we need to make some calls, people who can help. Journalists, inspectors general, congressional staffers. She looked at him. This goes beyond the chain of command. We bring in outside oversight. That'll make me a pariah. It'll keep you alive. Dalton took the phone. Who do we call first? Reporter I know, Washington Post, covered military scandals before. She'll listen. Sarah started entering a number from memory. But first you need to understand something. The people we're exposing, they've spent years building networks. Protection, leverage, they won't go down easy. I'm counting on it. The call connected. A woman's voice, groggy with sleep. This is Brennan? Sarah put the phone on speaker. Michelle, it's Sparrow. Silence. Then, holy shit, where are you? Can't say, but I've got something. Story of the decade, if you want it. I'm listening. Afghanistan. Intelligence falsification leading to friendly casualties. Evidence of systematic cover-ups. Direct links to field grade and senior officers. Sarah looked at Dalton, and a source willing to go on record. Who's the source? Dalton leaned toward the phone. Captain Dalton Hayes, 75th Ranger Regiment. You're active duty? Yes, ma'am. Another pause. This is career suicide, Captain. Only if we lose. He could hear Michelle Brennan's breathing over the line, the sound of a reporter smelling blood in the water. What kind of evidence are we talking about? Sarah listed it off. Documents, recordings, communications, pattern analysis, 6 months of compiled intelligence showing deliberate manipulation of threat assessments. How do I verify this? You don't. Not yet. Sarah's voice was firm. First, we need protection. Whistleblower status, legal coverage. Then we bring in IG. Then we release the evidence in a way that can't be suppressed. That's going to take time, coordination. How much time? Week. Maybe 2 if the lawyers are slow. Sarah glanced at Dalton. We might not have 2 weeks. Why not? Because people already know something's wrong. They're watching. The moment they figure out where the leak came from, gunfire erupted from the ridge line behind them. Dalton and Sarah dropped simultaneously, rolling behind the outcropping as rounds snapped overhead. The satellite phone skittered across rock. Contact rear, Dalton called, bringing his rifle up. Sarah was already moving, low and fast, finding a position with better angles. 8, maybe 10 fighters. They tracked us. How? Doesn't matter. We need to move. More gunfire. Closer now. Voices shouting in Pashto. The search teams from the village had found them faster than expected. Sarah returned fire. 3 precise shots that sent the attackers diving for cover. Northern route, through the draw. Go! Dalton grabbed the satellite phone and the waterproof bag. Started moving. Behind him, Sarah laid down covering fire with mechanical precision. Not suppression. Elimination. 2 fighters went down before the others wised up and stopped exposing themselves. Reloading, she called. Dalton turned and fired, giving her the seconds she needed. His rounds sparked off rocks, forced heads down, bought time. They bounded backward through broken terrain, trading fire and movement. Classic infantry tactics turned desperate and immediate. The Taliban fighters were pressing hard, using numbers to overwhelm precision. They've got flank elements, Sarah said, breathing hard. Trying to cut off the northern route. Can we break through? Not without casualties. She scanned the terrain, calculating options at combat speed. There's another way. Harder climb, but it leads to the ridge system. We can lose them in the rocks. Show me. She led him up a near vertical slope that required using both hands. Behind them, the gunfire intensified. Rounds ricocheted. One passed so close to Dalton's head he felt the heat. They crested the slope and found themselves on a narrow ridge with sheer drops on both sides. Sarah moved along it like she'd walked it 100 times. Dalton followed, trying not to look down at the 100-foot fall to either side. Halfway across, she stopped and turned, pulled a small device from her jacket. Looked like a remote detonator. What is that? Dalton asked. Insurance. She pressed the button. The slope they'd just climbed erupted in a cascade of rock and debris. Claymores, buried in camouflage, detonating in sequence. The explosion rolled through the attacking force. Screams cut through the gunfire. Jesus Christ, Dalton breathed. How long have you been preparing this? 6 weeks. I knew this ridge might be an escape route. She started moving again. I prepare everything. They kept moving for another 20 minutes, putting distance and elevation between themselves and the ambush site. Finally reached a position defensible enough to stop and assess. Dalton's hands were shaking now, adrenaline dump hitting hard. Sarah looked calm, breathing steady, like she'd just finished a morning jog. You okay? She asked. Define okay. She almost smiled. Checked her rifle, cleared a jam, reloaded with a fresh magazine. That was closer than I like. How did they find us so fast? Good training or good luck? Maybe both. She scanned their back trail. Either way, we can't stay here. They'll regroup and come again. Can we make it back to the FOB? Not directly. They'll have the approaches covered now. She pulled out a map, traced routes with her finger. We go east, loop around through the high country. Comes out near OP Restrepo. You can link up with friendly forces there. What about you? I keep moving. Stay ahead of them. That's not a plan. That's survival. It's what I do. Dalton grabbed her arm. No. We do this together or not at all. She pulled away. You don't understand. They're not just hunting me. They're hunting what I know. If we stay together, you become a target too. I became a target the moment I took that bag. This is different. How? Because I've been doing this alone for 18 months. I know how to disappear. You don't. Then teach me. She stared at him like he'd suggested they fly. This isn't a skill you learn in a day. I'm a fast learner. Dalton, my career's already over. You said it yourself. The moment I access those files, I'm burned. So what difference does it make if I stay with you or go back alone? Either way, I'm committed. Sarah's expression cycled through several emotions. Frustration, concern, something that might have been respect. You really don't quit, do you? Not on this. She looked away, jaw working. If you come with me, you follow my lead. No arguments, no second guessing. I say run, you run. I say hide, you hide. Understood? Understood. And when this is over, when we've delivered the evidence and the story breaks, you go back to your life. You don't look for me. You don't try to contact me. We're done. Why? Because I work better alone. Always have. But her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Dalton didn't push it. Deal. She took a long breath, then nodded. Okay. Then we move east, stay in the high country, avoid population centers. 3 days to Restrepo if we push hard. What about food, water? I've got caches, enough to get us there. She started walking. Come on, we're burning daylight. They moved through terrain that tested every physical limit Dalton possessed. Sarah set a pace that was just short of brutal, fast enough to cover ground, slow enough to stay quiet. She navigated by terrain association and dead reckoning, barely consulting the map. Hours passed. The sun climbed and the temperature rose. Dalton's water was gone by mid-afternoon. Sarah noticed and passed him one of her bottles without breaking stride. Drink slow, she said. We've got 6 hours till the next cache. How do you do this? Dalton asked between sips. Alone. For months. You get used to it. Do you? Or do you just get numb? She didn't answer. They reached a cave system as dusk fell. Sarah checked for occupants, human or animal, then declared it safe. They moved deep enough to avoid being visible from outside, then stopped. Dalton collapsed against the rock wall, every muscle screaming. Sarah remained standing, alert, listening to the darkness. Rest, she said. I'll take first watch. We should split it. You can barely stand. Neither can you. She finally sat, but kept her rifle across her lap. 4 hours. Then we switch. Dalton pulled out the waterproof bag, opened it carefully. The notebooks were field journals, observations written in precise handwriting, dates and times noted with military accuracy. The thumb drive was in a protective case, labeled with nothing but a serial number. That drive, Sarah said quietly. It's got recordings from a planning meeting, officers discussing how to massage intelligence to fit a narrative. They knew the sources were questionable, knew the risk assessment was flawed, pushed the operation anyway because it looked good on paper. The operation that killed your team, and 6 others over the following months. Same pattern, different targets. Her voice was flat, controlled. They treated soldiers like game pieces, acceptable losses in service of career advancement. Jesus. There's a recording of one colonel laughing about how boots on the ground wouldn't know the difference anyway, like we were too stupid to recognize bad intel. Her hands tightened on the rifle. My team leader knew. He pushed back, got overruled, went in anyway because that's what we do, and he died proving he was right. Dalton let the silence sit for a moment, then, what was his name? Master Sergeant Eric Vance. She looked at Dalton. My brother. The pieces clicked. That's why you can't let this go. That's why I'll never let this go. She stood and moved to the cave entrance, scanning the darkness. They killed him. Killed 7 other good men. Then classified the after-action report and reassigned everyone involved to different posts. Scattered the evidence. Made it impossible to connect the dots. Until you. Until me. Dalton stood and joined her at the entrance. We're going to make them answer for it. Maybe. Or maybe we're just going to get ourselves killed trying. Either way, we're trying. She looked at him sidelong. You're a strange man, Captain Hayes. How so? Most people run from fights like this. You're running toward it. Someone has to. Why you? Why not me? He gestured at the bag. I've got the evidence. I've got a witness. And I've got nothing left to lose that's worth more than this. Sarah was quiet. Then, my brother would have liked you. Yeah? He had the same stupid nobility complex, but she said it with something that sounded almost like affection. They stood there together, watching the last light fade from the sky. 2 soldiers who'd lost faith in the system but not in the mission. Somewhere in the darkness, enemies moved, searching, hunting. But for tonight, in this cave, with evidence that could topple careers and expose corruption, they were safe. And tomorrow, they'd keep moving. Because that's what soldiers did. Even the ones everyone had written off. Even the ghosts. Dalton was about to suggest they sleep in shifts when Sarah's body language changed, went rigid. Her hand came up slowly, signaling silence. Then he heard it. Voices. Multiple. Speaking Pashto. Close. Flashlight beams swept across the rocks outside the cave entrance. They'd been found. Sarah's hand moved to her sidearm in absolute silence. Dalton mirrored the movement, drawing his Glock with glacial slowness. The flashlight beams played across the rock face outside, searching methodically. The voices grew louder. 4 men, maybe 5, discussing whether to check the cave system or continue along the ridge. One voice arguing they were wasting time. Another insisting the Americans couldn't have gotten far. Sarah's eyes met Dalton's in the darkness. She pointed deeper into the cave, then at herself, then at the entrance. The message was clear. You go back, I'll handle this. Dalton shook his head fractionally. Not happening. She glared at him, pointed again more insistently. He stayed put. The flashlight beam swept closer. Footsteps crunched on loose rock. Someone was coming to check. Sarah made a decision. She pulled a flashbang from her vest, held up 3 fingers, counted down silently. 3, 2, 1. She rolled the device toward the entrance and they both pressed against the cave wall, eyes squeezed shut, mouths open. The detonation was catastrophic in the enclosed space. Even prepared, Dalton felt the pressure waves slam through his chest. His ears went flatline except for a high-pitched whine. Sarah moved before the echo faded. Out of the cave in a combat crouch, weapon up, acquiring targets while they were still blind and disoriented. Dalton followed half a second behind. 2 fighters were on the ground, hands over their faces, weapons dropped. A third was stumbling backward, trying to bring his AK up despite not being able to see. Sarah put him down with 2 center mass shots. Dalton tracked right and found the 4th man raising a rifle one-handed while keying a radio with the other. Dalton fired. The fighter dropped. The radio clattered away, still transmitting someone's confused shouting. Move, Sarah said, already running. They know we're here. They ran through the darkness using nods, pushing recklessly through terrain that would have been suicidal in daylight. Behind them, voices multiplied. Flashlights swept the rocks like searching fingers. Sarah led them down a scree slope that had Dalton half sliding, half falling, using his rifle for balance. At the bottom, she cut hard left into a narrow canyon barely wide enough for a man. Where does this go? Dalton gasped. Away from them. That's all that matters. They moved through the canyon for 20 minutes, the walls so close Dalton could touch both sides simultaneously. Above the stars were a thin ribbon of light. Behind, the pursuit sounds faded but didn't disappear entirely. The canyon opened into a small valley. Sarah stopped at the edge, scanning with her rifle optic. Settlement, she said. Maybe 15 structures, occupied. Dalton could see dim lights, hear goats bleating, smell wood smoke. Can we go around? Not fast enough. They're pushing us toward the populated areas, trying to flush us into the open. She lowered her rifle. We go through, quick and quiet. Anyone sees us, we're compromised. They moved along the valley's edge, staying in shadow, avoiding sight lines from the structures. Halfway through, a door opened and light spilled out. An old man stepped into the night, walking toward a pen of goats. Sarah and Dalton froze, becoming part of the landscape. The old man tended his animals, talking to them in low, soothing Pashto. Took his time. Eventually turned to go back inside. Stopped. Looked directly at where they stood in the shadows. Dalton's finger indexed along his pistol's frame. Ready, but not committed. The old man studied them for what felt like an eternity. Then he hawked and spat in the dirt, turned and walked back inside his home. The door closed. The light went out. He saw us, Dalton whispered. Yeah. And he let us go. Not everyone loves the Taliban. Sarah started moving again. But we don't have long. He'll tell someone, family, neighbors. Word spreads. They cleared the settlement and climbed into the high country as dawn began breaking. The terrain here was brutal. Loose rock, steep grades, altitude that made every breath feel insufficient. Sarah's pace never slowed. She moved like something was chasing her that Dalton couldn't see. Maybe there was. Maybe it had been chasing her for 18 months. They reached a plateau as the sun crested the horizon. Sarah finally stopped, breathing hard, and pulled out a GPS unit, checked their position. Frowned. What's wrong? Dalton asked. We're 15 clicks off course. That chase pushed us west. How far to Restrepo? 2 days instead of 1, and we burned through most of our water. She looked at him. There's a cache 6 hours north, food, water, medical supplies, but it's near a Taliban checkpoint. How near? Half a click. Dalton wiped sweat from his face. What are our options? Risk the cache or try to reach Restrepo on what we have. She pulled out her remaining water bottle, maybe a third full. We won't make it without resupply, not in this heat. Then we go for the cache. It'll be daylight, exposed movement near enemy positions. You've done this before. Alone, with one signature to hide. She gestured between them. 2 is different, harder to conceal. So we make it work. She studied him, something shifting behind her eyes. You trust me that much? You've kept me alive this long. Barely. Still count. She almost smiled. Okay, we rest here for 2 hours. Let the morning traffic settle at the checkpoint. Then we move. They found cover in a rock cluster that provided concealment and shade. Dalton finally allowed himself to feel how exhausted he was. Every muscle ached. His feet were blistered. The adrenaline debt from the last 12 hours was catching up hard. Sarah pulled out an energy bar, split it, handed him half. Eat slow, she said. Make it last. They ate in silence, watching the valley below. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Vehicles moved along dirt roads, life continuing normally while 2 people hunted each other through the mountains above. Tell me about him, Dalton said after a while. Your brother. What was he like? Sarah was quiet long enough that he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, stubborn. Believed in doing things right even when it cost him. Made sergeant at 23. Could have made officer, but he wanted to stay with his team. She picked at the energy bar. He practically raised me after our parents died. Made sure I stayed in school, kept me out of trouble. When I enlisted, he about lost his mind, tried to talk me out of it. But you didn't listen. I wanted to be like him. Thought if I proved myself in the field, he'd see me as an equal instead of a kid sister. A bitter laugh. Careful what you wish for. Did he see you that way? Eventually? Yeah. Called me the best tactical analyst he'd ever worked with. Said I saw patterns other people missed. Her voice went soft. The last thing he said to me before that mission was, trust your gut, Sarah. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And the mission felt wrong. Everything about it. The intel was thin, the timing was rushed, the contingencies were weak. She looked at Dalton. I told him, wrote a whole assessment. He agreed, took it up the chain, got shut down. By who? Colonel Marcus Ashford, task force commander, career officer with political connections. Wanted successful operations to pad his record before retirement. Her jaw tightened. He overruled the assessment, called it excessive caution, said we were risk-averse. And then your brother died, proving him wrong. Ashford got a Bronze Star for the operation, called it a tactical success despite the casualties, wrote in his report that the intelligence was sound and the team executed properly. Blamed the deaths on unpredictable enemy response. She turned to face him fully. That's on the recordings. Him and two other officers discussing how to frame the narrative before the bodies were even cold. Dalton felt rage building in his chest. Where is he now? Pentagon, Joint Chiefs Staff, being considered for a star. She pulled out the thumb drive, held it up to the light. Unless this ends him first. It will. You sound certain. I am. Because we're not going to let him bury this like he buried your assessment. Sarah looked at the drive for a long moment, then secured it back in the waterproof bag. 2 hours. Then we move. They reached the area near the cache as afternoon heat baked the landscape into shimmering stillness. Sarah had them approach from the west, using a dry riverbed for concealment. The Taliban checkpoint was visible in the distance, a small compound with makeshift barriers and fighting positions. 4 guards visible, Sarah whispered, glassing the checkpoint through her rifle scope. Probably 2 more inside. They rotate every 6 hours. Change is at 1600. Dalton checked his watch. 40 minutes. We wait for the change. Everyone's distracted. Guards coming off shift are tired. Guards going on are still waking up. 3-minute window where nobody's paying attention. They settled into a position with cover and observation. Waited. The sun beat down mercilessly. Dalton's water was gone. His mouth felt like sand. Sarah passed him the last of hers. Small sips. You need it too. I'm used to being thirsty. You're not. He drank, hating how good it felt. Passed it back. She finished it without comment. 1,600 came. A truck rolled up to the checkpoint. 6 men climbed out, fresh and alert. The guards who'd been on duty shuffled toward the truck, weapons slung, shoulders slumped with exhaustion. Now, Sarah said. They moved low and fast, using every fold in the terrain. The cache was hidden in a collapsed well 200 meters from the checkpoint, disguised to look like rubble. Sarah moved the stones with practiced efficiency, revealing a sealed container. Inside, water bottles, MREs, medical supplies, batteries, and a spare radio. They loaded what they could carry. Dalton drank half a bottle of water in one long pull, felt his body begin to recover. We need to move before, shouting from the checkpoint, someone pointing in their direction. Shit, Sarah hissed. They saw us. Gunfire crackled. Rounds snapped overhead. They ran, leaving the cache exposed, focusing only on distance. Behind them, engines roared to life. The Taliban weren't just shooting, they were mobilizing. They're coming with vehicles, Dalton said, breathing hard. I know. Keep moving. They climbed into the rocks where trucks couldn't follow, but that wouldn't stop dismounted pursuit. Sarah led them higher, pushing a pace that had Dalton's lungs burning. There, she gasped, pointing. A ridge system ahead. Broken terrain. Good defensive ground. They reached it as the first Taliban fighters appeared below, climbing after them. Sarah found a position between 2 boulders and took a knee, rifle coming up. I'll slow them. You keep moving. We move together. Dalton, this isn't together. She looked at him, started to argue, then nodded. Okay, we do this smart. Leapfrog. I shoot, you move, you shoot, I move. Stay ahead of them, but bleed their momentum. They executed the tactic perfectly. Sarah would fire, precise shots that dropped fighters or forced them into cover. Then Dalton would move to a new position and provide covering fire while she displaced. Classic infantry tactics stretched across mountainous terrain, but there were too many pursuers. For every one they dropped, 2 more appeared. They're calling in reinforcements, Sarah said during one displacement. We need to break contact completely. How? She pulled her last flashbang. We make them think we're somewhere we're not. She threw the device into a side canyon, then they moved in the opposite direction as it detonated. The explosion echoed through the mountains. Shouts rose from below as fighters redirected toward the sound. Bought us maybe 10 minutes, Sarah said. They used every second, pushing into terrain so difficult the Taliban would need to be suicidal to follow. A knife-edge ridge, a near-vertical climb, a traverse across loose scree that sent rocks clattering into the void. Finally, they reached a position defensible enough to stop. Both collapsed, gasping, drenched in sweat despite the altitude chill. "We can't keep this up," Dalton said between breaths. "I know. We need a different play." Sarah pulled out the satellite phone, checked it. The screen was cracked from the running and climbing, but it still showed signal. "We call for extract," she said. "Get friendly forces to our position." "They'll ask questions." "Let them ask. We're out of options." She started dialing. The call connected. Same woman's voice. "Brennan?" "Michelle, it's Sparrow. We need help." "Where are you?" Sarah gave coordinates. "We're being pursued. Taliban force, maybe 30 strong. We need immediate extraction." "I'm a reporter, not the military. But you have contacts who are. People who owe you favors. Call them. Tell them 2 Americans need emergency pickup." Her voice was steady despite the exhaustion. "And tell them we have the story that's going to end careers." "What happened?" "We got the evidence, all of it, but someone doesn't want us getting it out." She glanced at Dalton. "We've got maybe 2 hours before they find us. After that, we're done." Static on the line. Then, "I'll make calls. Stay alive." The connection died. They waited, scanned the approaches, conserved ammunition, drank water and tried not to think about what would happen if help didn't come. An hour passed. The sun began its descent toward the western peaks. Dalton's radio, the one from Sarah's cache, crackled to life. "Any station this net. Any station this net. This is Eagle 6-1, searching for Reaper 2-6. Over." Dalton grabbed the radio. "Eagle 6-1, this is Reaper 2-6. Go ahead." 2-6, we are inbound to your position for emergency extract. Mark your location with VS-17 panel and prepare for hoist recovery. ETA 12 minutes. "Roger. Eagle 6-1, marking now." He looked at Sarah. "They came." Michelle keeps her promises. They pulled out the orange signal panel, secured it in a visible position, then settled in to wait, weapons covering the approaches. 8 minutes later, they heard it. The deep thump of rotor blades. A Black Hawk crested the ridge, door gunners visible, coming in fast and low. Below, the Taliban fighters heard it too, started running toward their position, desperate to close the distance before the helicopter arrived. "Suppressive fire!" Sarah shouted. They both opened up, not aiming for kills, but forcing the attackers into cover. Buying seconds. The Black Hawk flared overhead, rotor wash blasting them with wind and debris. A crew chief appeared in the door, lowering a hoist cable. "You first," Sarah said. "Together." "There's only one." Dalton grabbed her arm and the hoist hook simultaneously, clipped them both in with a carabiner. "Together." The crew chief saw what he'd done and gave a thumbs up. The cable retracted. They lifted off the ground as bullets cracked past. Sarah twisted and fired one-handed, keeping the pursuers' heads down. Dalton did the same, burning through his last magazine. Then they were inside the helicopter, hands pulling them aboard, the crew chief yelling to the pilots to get them out. The Black Hawk banked hard and climbed, gaining altitude and distance. Below, the Taliban fighters became small figures on a vast landscape, growing smaller until they disappeared entirely. Dalton sat against the hull, lungs heaving, adrenaline finally crashing. Beside him, Sarah did the same, eyes closed, rifle still gripped tight. A medic approached, started checking them for injuries, found cuts, bruises, dehydration, but nothing critical. The crew chief leaned close and shouted over the rotor noise. "You're Reaper 2-6?" Dalton nodded. "Message from command. You're to proceed directly to Bagram. Inspector General team is waiting." The crew chief's expression was carefully neutral. "Sir? What the hell did you do?" "My job," Dalton said. The flight to Bagram took 90 minutes. They were met on the tarmac by 4 MPs and a full colonel Dalton didn't recognize. "Captain Hayes," the colonel said, "you're to surrender all equipment and come with us. You too, Ms. Vance." Sarah's head snapped up. "You know who I am." "Ma'am, half of CENTCOM knows who you are as of 2 hours ago." The colonel's expression was unreadable. "Your reporter friend made a lot of noise. Now we're all dealing with the consequences." They were escorted to a secure building and separated. Dalton was put in a windowless room with a table, 2 chairs, and a camera in the corner, left alone for 20 minutes. Then the door opened and 2 men in suits walked in. Not agency. Lawyers. Captain Hayes, I'm Mr. Reeves from the Army JAG Corps. This is Mr. Patterson from the Department of Defense Inspector General's office. Reeves sat down across from him. You're not under arrest, but you are subject to an investigation regarding unauthorized operations, failure to report contact with a fugitive asset, and possession of classified materials. She's not a fugitive. She's a whistleblower. Patterson leaned forward. Miss Vance deserted her post 18 months ago. She's been operating illegally in Afghanistan without authorization. That makes her AWOL at minimum, potentially worse. She's been doing the work nobody else would do, saving lives, documenting enemy patterns, warning command about compromised operations, none of which she was authorized to do, because the people who should have authorized it were the ones covering their asses. Dalton pulled the waterproof bag from his vest and slapped it on the table. It's all here. Recordings. Documents. Evidence of senior officers falsifying intelligence reports. 6 months of pattern analysis showing systemic failures that got soldiers killed. Reeves and Patterson exchanged glances. We need to examine those materials, Patterson said. You need to act on them, Dalton corrected. Colonel Marcus Ashford. He's on those recordings discussing how to manipulate threat assessments, how to frame operations as successful despite casualties, how to protect his career at the expense of truth. That's a serious allegation against a field-grade officer. It's a fact supported by evidence. Dalton's voice was hard. And if you try to bury this, I'll make sure every media outlet in Washington knows exactly what's on that drive. Is that a threat, Captain? It's a promise. Patterson picked up the bag, opened it carefully, pulled out the thumb drive. We'll need to verify the chain of custody, confirm the files haven't been tampered with. They're authentic, you'll see. And Ms. Vance? What's her status in all this? She's a source, a witness, and someone who deserves protection, not prosecution. Reeves made notes. You understand this puts you in a difficult position, consorting with an AWOL soldier, taking possession of potentially classified materials without proper authorization, operating outside the chain of command. I understand I did what was right when the system failed to. The system, Patterson said quietly, is designed to handle these situations through proper channels. The proper channels got 18 men killed and let the people responsible walk away with medals. Dalton leaned forward. So forgive me if I don't have a lot of faith in the system right now. The interrogation continued for 3 more hours. They went through everything, the ambush at Kara's Pass, the meeting with Sarah, the intelligence she'd provided, the firefights, the extraction. Dalton answered every question directly, holding nothing back. Finally, they left him alone again. Another hour passed. Then the door opened and a different man walked in. Older, gray hair, stars on his shoulders. Brigadier General. Dalton stood automatically. Sit, Captain. The general took the opposite chair, waited until the lawyers left the room. I'm General Hackett. I run the Inspector General's office for CENTCOM. Sir, I've spent the last 4 hours reviewing the materials you provided, the recordings, the documents, Miss Vance's intelligence compilations. Hackett's expression was grave. If this is authentic, and preliminary analysis suggests it is, we're looking at the worst intelligence scandal since Abu Ghraib. It's authentic. Colonel Ashford and at least 3 other senior officers deliberately manipulated threat assessments to justify operations that served their career interests rather than strategic objectives. In doing so, they created situations that resulted in preventable American casualties. Hackett's jaw tightened. That's not just incompetence. That's criminal negligence. Possibly worse. What happens now? Now, I brief the commanding general. He briefs the Pentagon. They decide how public this gets and how hard we come down. Hackett paused. But I want you to understand something, Captain. The people you're accusing have powerful friends, allies in Congress, media connections. They will fight this, hard. Let them fight. And they'll come after you, your record, your credibility. They'll find every mistake you've ever made and amplify it. Make you the problem instead of the solution. I can handle it. Can Ms. Vance? Dalton met his eyes. She's been handling it alone for 18 months. Now she's got support. Hackett nodded slowly. Okay, here's what's going to happen. You're being placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. You'll remain at Bagram, available for interviews. You don't talk to media. You don't discuss this with anyone outside official channels. Clear? And Sarah? Ms. Vance is being offered a deal. Full cooperation with the investigation in exchange for immunity from AWOL charges. She'll be debriefed, her intelligence will be formally integrated into our systems, and she'll be protected as a whistleblower under federal law. She'll agree to that? She already has. Hackett stood. You did good work, Captain. Risky, possibly career-ending, but good. Now let the system do its job. Will it? That depends on whether the truth matters more than politics. Hackett walked to the door, paused. For what it's worth, I'm going to fight like hell to make sure it does. Dalton was assigned temporary quarters and told to stay available. He slept for 14 hours straight, his body finally demanding payment for the accumulated exhaustion. When he woke, there was a note slipped under his door. Just a grid coordinate and a time. Sarah's handwriting. He went to the location, a quiet corner of the base near the perimeter fence, at the specified time. Found her waiting, looking cleaner than he'd ever seen her, but somehow smaller without the mountains behind her. Hey, she said. Hey. They stood there awkwardly for a moment. Then Sarah pulled out a pack of cigarettes, offered him one. I don't smoke, Dalton said. Neither do I. Picked these up anyway. She lit one, took a drag, coughed. Terrible habit. How'd the debrief go? Long, thorough. They want everything. Every operation I observed, every pattern I documented. They're building a case. She looked at him. It's really happening. They're actually going to do something. You sound surprised. I spent 18 months screaming into the void. Yeah, I'm a little surprised someone finally listened. A transport truck rumbled past, soldiers jogged by in formation, normal base operations, unaware of the storm building. What happens to you? Dalton asked. After this? Don't know. They're talking about reinstatement, back pay, formal apology. She laughed bitterly. Like that fixes anything. It's a start. Is it? My brother's still dead. Those 8 operators are still dead. All the men who died in subsequent operations are still dead. She dropped the cigarette, crushed it under her boot. Ashford getting prosecuted doesn't bring them back. No, but it stops him from killing more. She nodded slowly. Yeah, I guess it does. They watched the base activity in silence. Then Sarah said quietly, Thank you for believing me, for risking everything. You didn't have to. Yeah, I did. Why? Because it was right, and because someone needed to stand with you. He turned to face her fully. You've been alone long enough. Her eyes glistened. She blinked it away. Don't make me cry, Hayes. I've got a reputation to maintain. The ghost who doesn't feel emotions? Something like that. His radio crackled. Captain Hayes, report to Building 7 immediately. Dalton keyed the transmit. On my way. He looked at Sarah. Guess they're not done with me yet. Go. I'll be around. He started walking, then turned back. Sarah? Yeah? When this is over, when the investigation wraps and the trials happen and everything settles, don't disappear again. She smiled, small, sad. We'll see. Building 7 turned out to be a secure conference room filled with people. General Hackett, the IG lawyers, a woman Dalton didn't recognize but who had Defense Department written all over her, and on a video screen, Michelle Brennan, the reporter. Captain Hayes, have a seat, Hackett said. Dalton sat, suddenly aware he was the only person in the room below the rank of colonel. The Defense Department woman spoke first. Captain, I'm Deputy Undersecretary Morrison. I've been tasked with managing the public disclosure of this matter. The evidence you and Ms. Vance provided has been authenticated. It's damning. We're moving forward with formal charges against Colonel Ashford and 3 other officers. Good. However, there's a complication. Morrison gestured at the screen. Ms. Brennan has informed us she's publishing her story in 48 hours, with or without our cooperation. Michelle's voice came through the speakers. The public has a right to know that senior military officers falsified intelligence and got soldiers killed. I'm not sitting on this story. We're not asking you to sit on it, Morrison said tightly. We're asking for coordination. Let us make arrests first. Control the narrative. You mean spin it? I mean ensure justice is served without compromising ongoing operations or national security. Hackett leaned forward. Michelle, if you publish before we have Ashford in custody, he'll lawyer up. His allies will start destroying evidence. We'll lose our chance at full accountability. Then arrest him faster. It's not that simple. He's at the Pentagon. We need authorization from the Secretary of Defense to detain a colonel on his personal staff. That takes time. How much time? 72 hours? Maybe 96. I'll hold for 48. That's all I can promise. Michelle looked directly at the camera. Captain Hayes, you risked everything to expose this. I'm not going to waste that by letting bureaucracy bury it again. Dalton thought about Sarah, about her brother, about the 12 men in his patrol who'd walked into an ambush that could have been prevented. Publish, he said. Do it in 48 hours, like you said. Make it public before they can circle the wagons. Morrison's face went red. Captain, you don't have the authority. He has the moral authority, Hackett interrupted, which counts for something. The general looked at Morrison. We move fast, get the authorization expedited. Arrest Ashford and the others within 48 hours. Then we coordinate with Ms. Brennan on the timing of her story. And if we can't get authorization that fast, then we accept that the truth is going to come out messy and we deal with the consequences. Morrison looked like she wanted to argue. Instead, she gathered her papers. I'll make the calls. But if this blows up, the blame lands on all of us. She left. The lawyers followed. Soon it was just Dalton, Hackett, and Michelle on the screen. You just made a lot of powerful people very angry, Michelle said. Wouldn't be the first time today. She smiled. I'm going to need an on-record interview, your perspective, what you saw, why you did what you did. When? Tonight, before anyone can stop us. Hackett nodded. Do it. Tell the truth. Let people decide for themselves. The interview lasted 2 hours. Michelle asked hard questions. Dalton answered honestly. He talked about Carrez Pass, about Sarah's intelligence being ignored, about finding the recordings that proved Ashford had knowingly sent men into compromised operations. When it was over, Michelle said, This is going to change things, Captain, for you, for Ms. Vance, for the military. Good. It won't be comfortable. The right thing usually isn't. The video call ended. Dalton sat alone in the conference room, processing everything that had just happened. Somewhere in Washington, wheels were turning, arrests being planned, lawyers mobilizing, media preparing. The storm was coming, and this time, the people who'd created it couldn't hide. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number, roof, now. He found Sarah on the roof of the building, sitting on the edge with her legs dangling into space, watching the sun set over the mountains. That was fast, she said as he approached. What was? Your interview. It's already making rounds. People are talking. How do you know? She held up a tablet showing a defense news site. The headline read, Ranger Captain accuses senior officers of intelligence fraud. Multiple casualties linked to falsified reports. Jesus, Dalton breathed. That was supposed to publish in 48 hours. Michelle couldn't wait. Too many people trying to kill the story. Sarah scrolled through the article. She published everything, the recordings, the documents, your interview. It's all out there now. Dalton's phone started ringing. General Hackett. Sir? Dalton answered. Have you seen the news? Hackett's voice was tight. Just now. Morrison is losing her mind. Says this violated every agreement. Says you sabotaged the investigation. I didn't know Brennan was publishing early. Doesn't matter. The horse is out of the barn. A pause. For what it's worth, she did good work. The article is thorough, damning. Ashford's going to have a hard time spinning this. What happens now? Now we watch the dominoes fall. They fell fast. Within 6 hours, Ashford was placed under arrest at his Pentagon office. The other 3 officers named in the report were detained at their respective posts. Congressional committees announced investigations. The The Secretary of Defense gave a press conference promising full accountability. Social media exploded. Veterans groups demanded answers. News networks ran the story on loop. Sarah's face, pulled from old military photos, appeared on every major outlet alongside headlines about the ghost sniper who exposed Pentagon corruption. Through it all, Dalton and Sarah remained at Bagram, watching the fire spread. "They're calling you a hero," Dalton said, showing her his phone. "I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who wouldn't let it go." "Sometimes that's the same thing." She looked at him. "What about you? How are you holding up?" "My command is furious. My career is probably over. Half the officers I know won't return my calls." He set the phone down. "But I can sleep at night, so I'm good." 3 days later, they were summoned to another conference. This time it included a 4-star general, 2 senators via video, and what looked like every lawyer in Afghanistan. General Clark, the CENTCOM commander, spoke first. "Ms. Vance?" "Captain Hayes. What you did was reckless, insubordinate, and violated about a dozen regulations." "Here it comes," Dalton thought. "It was also," Clark continued, "exactly what needed to happen. The evidence you provided has exposed systemic failures in our intelligence validation processes, failures that cost lives. We're implementing immediate reforms. Everyone involved in operations planning will undergo retraining. New oversight mechanisms are being established, and the officers responsible for falsifying reports are facing court-martial." One of the senators leaned forward on screen. "Ms. Vance, we owe you an apology. You tried to warn us. We didn't listen. That's on us." Sarah sat perfectly still. "Apologies don't bring back the dead, Senator." "No, they don't, but reform might save the living." The senator looked at papers off screen. "We're proposing legislation, the Vance Accountability Act. It would create independent review boards for military intelligence assessments, require multiple verification sources, protect whistleblowers who report systemic issues." "You're naming it after my brother." "If you'll allow it." Sarah's hands clenched in her lap. Dalton saw her fighting to maintain composure. Finally, she nodded. He'd like that. The meeting continued for another hour. Details, procedures, future testimony requirements. When it ended, Dalton and Sarah walked out into the Afghan sun, feeling lighter than they had in months. "It's really over," Sarah said quietly. "The fight is. The healing takes longer." "Yeah." She looked at the mountains in the distance. "I used to hate those mountains. They took everything from me, but now—" She trailed off. "Now? Now I think they gave me something too. Purpose, clarity, a reason to keep going when it would have been easier to quit." Dalton followed her gaze. "What will you do now?" "Don't know. They're offering reinstatement, full rank, back pay, but I'm not sure I want to go back to how things were." "Then don't. Make it something new." She smiled. "What about you?" "Same boat. My command doesn't know what to do with me. I'm too hot to promote, but too public to punish." "Sounds like a perfect time to do something crazy." "Like what?" She looked at him. "Like starting a consultancy. Teaching units how to actually analyze intelligence, how to spot the warning signs we missed, how to trust the people who see problems before they become catastrophes." "We?" "I need a partner. Someone stubborn enough to fight the system with me. Someone who knows what it costs to do the right thing." She extended her hand. "Interested?" Dalton looked at her hand, at the mountains, at the base where soldiers continued preparing for missions that might be built on intelligence that wasn't quite right. He shook her hand. "Yeah, I'm interested." Somewhere in the Pentagon, lawyers were building cases. Somewhere in Washington, politicians were drafting legislation. Somewhere in Arlington, families were getting closure they'd thought would never come. And somewhere in the Hindu Kush, the mountains held their secrets a little less tightly, because 2 people had refused to stay silent, had refused to accept that this was just how things were, had looked at a broken system and decided to break it better. The fight wasn't over. It never really was. But for the first time in 18 months, Sarah Vance wasn't fighting alone. And that made all the difference. 6 months later, Dalton stood in a hearing room in the Russell Senate office building, watching Colonel Marcus Ashford take the stand. The room was packed. Journalists, veteran advocacy groups, family members of the fallen, congressional staffers taking notes for their bosses. Every seat filled. Standing room only, against the back wall. Sarah sat 2 rows behind Dalton, wearing a suit that looked uncomfortable on her but military enough to convey respect. She'd testified yesterday, her voice steady as she walked the committee through every warning she'd given, every piece of intelligence that had been ignored, every pattern that had screamed trap before her brother walked into one. The senators had listened in silence. When she finished, the chairman had thanked her. Then he'd asked the question everyone wanted answered. Ms. Vance, in your professional opinion, could these deaths have been prevented? She'd looked straight at Ashford, who sat in the gallery with his lawyers flanking him like bodyguards. Yes, Senator, every single one. Now it was Ashford's turn. He looked smaller than Dalton remembered from the file photos. Grayer. The stars and medals that had once adorned his uniform were gone, replaced by a civilian suit that hung on him like borrowed clothes. His lawyers had prepped him well, posture erect, expression carefully neutral, voice measured when he spoke. Senator Chen, the committee chair, started with the basics. Background. Service record. The operations in question. Ashford answered smoothly. Talked about difficult decisions made in high-pressure environments. The fog of war. The complexity of intelligence analysis. All the standard deflections wrapped in military jargon designed to confuse civilians. Then Chen pulled out a transcript. Colonel Ashford, I'm reading from a recording dated March 15, 2024. You're speaking with Major Donnelly and Captain Price about Operation Copper Dagger, the mission that resulted in 8 KYA, including Master Sergeant Eric Vance. You say, and I quote, "The intelligence is thin, but we need to win this quarter. Massage the threat assessment. Make it look actionable." Did you say that? Ashford's jaw tightened. That's taken out of context, Senator. What context makes it acceptable to massage intelligence that's about to send soldiers into combat? We were discussing how to present complex information to decision makers in a way they could understand and act on. You were discussing how to lie. Chen's voice went hard. You knew the intelligence was questionable. You knew the mission was high risk, and you pushed it anyway because you wanted a successful operation on your record before retirement. Isn't that true? I made the best decision I could with the information available. You made the decision that served your career. Chen flipped through more papers. We have 6 other recordings, 6 other operations where you or officers under your command altered intelligence assessments to justify missions. 17 soldiers died across those operations. 17. Ashford's lawyer leaned in, whispered something. Ashford shook his head. Senator, combat is inherently risky. Sometimes good men die despite our best efforts. They died because of your worst efforts, Colonel. Because you prioritized optics over accuracy. Because you treated soldiers like chess pieces in a career advancement game. The room was absolutely silent. Dalton watched Ashford's face cycle through emotions. Anger, fear, defiance, resignation. The man was realizing in real time that his carefully constructed defense was collapsing. Senator Martinez, a Marine veteran, spoke up next. Colonel, I served 3 tours in Iraq. I know what it's like to make life and death decisions with imperfect information. But what you did wasn't imperfect judgment. It was systematic deception. You falsified threat levels. You silenced dissenting analysts. You created a culture where telling the truth got you sidelined. She leaned forward. Ms. Vance tried to warn you about the operation that killed her brother. What did you tell her? Ashford was quiet for a long moment. I don't recall the specific conversation. Then let me refresh your memory. Martinez pulled out another document. She filed a formal intelligence objection 3 days before the mission, cited 12 separate indicators that the target site was compromised. You rejected it without review and wrote in your response, again, I quote, "Analyst demonstrates excessive caution bordering on cowardice. Recommend reassignment to less critical duties." That was your response to someone trying to save lives. I stand by my assessment that she was being overly cautious. 8 men died, proving she was right. The words hung in the air like an indictment. Chen spoke again. Colonel Ashford, this committee is recommending you face court-martial on charges of dereliction of duty, falsifying official documents, and negligent homicide. Do you have anything to say? Ashford looked at his lawyers. They whispered furiously. Finally, he turned back to the microphone. I served my country for 32 years. Everything I did was in service of the mission and the safety of American forces. If mistakes were made, they were made in good faith. Good faith doesn't falsify intelligence reports, Chen said. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel came down. Journalists surged toward Ashford, shouting questions. His lawyers formed a protective barrier, rushing him toward the exit. Cameras flashed. Dalton caught a glimpse of his face. No longer the confident colonel from the file photos, but a broken man watching his legacy burn. Sarah appeared at Dalton's shoulder. It's done. Not yet. Court-martial still has to happen. It will. They have too much evidence to back down now. She watched Ashford disappear through the exit. He's going to prison. Good. They walked out of the building together into gray Washington weather. Protesters had gathered on the steps, veterans holding signs demanding accountability, family members of the fallen, active duty soldiers who'd taken leave to be here. One woman approached Sarah, mid-50s, wearing a photo button of a young soldier. Ms. Vance? Sarah stopped. Yes, ma'am. My son was one of the 8, Staff Sergeant James Riley. He served with your brother. The woman's voice cracked. I just wanted to say thank you for not giving up, for making them listen. Sarah's composure fractured slightly. I'm so sorry for your loss. I know, and I'm sorry for yours. The woman took Sarah's hand. But because of what you did, maybe fewer mothers will get that knock on the door. Maybe the next analyst who sees a problem won't be afraid to speak up. Other family members approached. More thanks. More tears. More photos of sons and daughters and husbands and wives who died in operations built on lies. Dalton stepped back, giving Sarah space to grieve with people who understood what she'd lost. He found a quiet corner and pulled out his phone. Messages had been piling up all morning. General Hackett, excellent testimony. You represented yourself and the service well. Michelle Brennan, stories running front page tomorrow. They're calling it the biggest military scandal since My Lai. His former platoon sergeant. Proud of you, sir. You did the hard right over the easy wrong, and won from an unknown number. The Valley remembers, so do we. Rangers at Kara's Pass. He smiled at that last one. The men he'd saved were watching, supporting, remembering. Sarah finished with the families and rejoined him. Her eyes were red but clear. They needed that. I think I did too. How are you holding up? Better than I expected, worse than I hoped. She looked at the protesters still gathering. This is bigger than I thought it would be. Truth usually is. They grabbed coffee at a shop near the Capitol, sitting in a corner booth where they could watch the foot traffic. Tourists, lobbyists, staffers rushing between meetings. The machinery of government grinding forward, indifferent to individual stories. I got a call this morning, Sarah said, wrapping her hands around her cup. From the Army. They want me to come back, train the next generation of intelligence analysts, make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to them. What did you tell them? That I'd think about it. She took a sip. Part of me wants to fix the system from inside, but another part remembers why I left. The bureaucracy, the politics, the way truth gets bent to fit agendas. So, don't go back to the old system. Build a new one. That's what we talked about, the consultancy. Still interested? She looked at him over the rim of her cup. Are you? We'd be fighting uphill battles, challenging established procedures, making powerful people uncomfortable. Sounds perfect. It won't be glamorous or particularly profitable at first. We'd be the people telling commanders what they don't want to hear. Someone needs to. And when they ignore us, we make enough noise that they can't. Dalton leaned forward. Sarah, we just brought down a colonel and exposed systematic corruption at the Pentagon. If we can do that, we can damn sure build something better. She was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled out a notebook, the same kind she'd used in the mountains, weatherproof and practical, open to a blank page. Okay, let's talk specifics. They spent the next 3 hours planning, mission statement, target clients, service offerings, how to structure it so they maintained independence while still being effective. Sarah sketched organizational charts. Dalton worked through pricing models. They argued about priorities, compromised on structure, built something that felt right. By the time they left, They had the skeleton of a company. Vance and Hayes Strategic Intelligence. Tagline, Truth Before Politics. "It's going to be hard," Sarah said as they walked back toward their hotel. "The best things usually are. People are going to resist, especially when we tell them their plans are wrong. Let them. We'll have the receipts to back it up." She stopped walking, turned to face him. "Why are you doing this? Really? You could go back to the Rangers. Command will take you back eventually. You could have a normal career." "I don't want normal. I want meaningful." He gestured at the Capitol behind them. "What we did in there today? That mattered, changed things, saved future lives. I'm not going back to operations where I have to wonder if the intelligence is real or manufactured." "So you're doing this for you?" "I'm doing it because it's right, and because I can't think of anyone I'd rather do it with." Sarah smiled, the real one, not the careful professional mask. "You're still the strangest man I've ever met." "I'll take that as a compliment." "It is." They continued walking. The city bustled around them, thousands of people pursuing their own agendas, building their own futures. Somewhere in the city, Ashford sat in a holding cell awaiting court-martial. Somewhere, his co-conspirators were cutting deals with prosecutors. Somewhere, families of the fallen were beginning to find closure. And somewhere, two people who'd been written off and underestimated were building something new. The court-martial took place 4 months later at Fort Meade. Dalton and Sarah both testified, walking the panel through the evidence methodically. The defense tried to discredit them, questioned Sarah's mental state after her brother's death, implied Dalton was grandstanding for attention. The prosecution brought receipts, played the recordings, showed the falsified reports side by side with the original intelligence, called witnesses who'd been pressured to change assessments. By the third day, the defense had nothing left but character witnesses talking about what a good officer Ashford used to be. The verdict came back unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing was swift. Dishonorable discharge. Forfeiture of all pay and benefits. 8 years in military prison. When they led him away in handcuffs, Ashford looked directly at Sarah. Not with hatred or anger, but with something that might have been understanding. A recognition that he'd been caught doing what dozens of other officers probably still did. That he was the cautionary tale, not the exception. Sarah held his gaze until he disappeared from view. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Dalton gave a brief statement thanking the prosecution team and the military justice system for taking this seriously. Sarah said nothing, just stood beside him with her head high. Later, in a quiet restaurant away from the media circus, they raised glasses of whiskey. "To your brother," Dalton said. "To all of them," Sarah corrected. "Every soldier who died because someone cared more about their career than the truth." They drank. "What now?" Dalton asked. "Now we get to work." Sarah pulled out her laptop, opened a file. "I've been mapping patterns across CENTCOM operations for the last 6 months. There are indicators. Small things. Missions that look good on paper but feel wrong tactically. I think there are more Ashfords out there, more operations built on questionable intelligence. You want to find them. I want to stop them before they get soldiers killed." She turned the laptop so he could see. Charts, graphs, pattern analysis. "This is what we do, not after the fact. Before. We identify the warning signs. We consult with commands planning operations. We be the voice that says, wait, this doesn't add up." Dalton studied the data, saw what she was seeing, the subtle indicators that something was wrong. The same patterns that had preceded Kara's pass and a dozen other near disasters. "When do we start?" "Already have. Got our first client last week. Brigade commander at Fort Campbell. They're planning an operation in Syria. He read about us in the Army Times. Wants a second opinion on the intelligence package. And I need my partner to help me analyze it." She closed the laptop. "So what do you say? Ready to tell a brigade commander his intel is garbage?" "Only if it is." "Oh, it is. Signals intelligence from a source that doesn't exist and imagery that's 3 months old. Classic red flags." Dalton grinned. "Then yeah, let's ruin his day." Over the next year, they built their reputation one difficult conversation at a time. Commands that were willing to hear hard truths sought them out. Those that weren't learned the hard way when operations went sideways, exactly how Sarah had predicted. Word spread. The team that had exposed Ashford was now available for consultation. Expensive, uncomfortable, but worth it if you actually cared about bringing your soldiers home. They hired their first employee, a former Marine intelligence analyst who'd been pushed out for questioning bad data. Then a second. Then a third. The company grew from 2 people in a shared office to a team of 12 operating out of a renovated warehouse in Alexandria. They turned down more work than they accepted, focusing only on operations where they could make a real difference. Sarah established a policy. If a command wouldn't let them speak to the analyst directly, they wouldn't take the job. No filtering through political appointees or career officers with agendas. The truth, unvarnished and direct, or nothing. It made them unpopular in some circles, earned them enemies among officers who valued process over precision. But it also saved lives. Operations got delayed while intelligence was re-verified. Attack plans got revised based on their assessments. Soldiers came home because someone had the courage to say, "This mission is built on bad information." 18 months after the company launched, Sarah got a call from the Army Chief of Staff. She put it on speaker so Dalton could hear. "Ms. Vance, this is General Morrison. I'm calling to formally request your assistance with a matter of strategic importance." "I'm listening, General." "We're developing new protocols for intelligence validation across all combat commands. Given your experience and your company's track record, we'd like you to lead the development team." Sarah glanced at Dalton. He nodded. "What's the timeline?" she asked. 6 months for initial framework, full implementation within a year. "And we have full authority? No political interference? No watering down the requirements to make people comfortable?" A pause. "You'll report directly to me. If someone tries to bury your recommendations, I want to know about it immediately." "Then yes, General. We'll do it." They spent the next 6 months building what became known as the Vance Protocols, a comprehensive system for validating intelligence before it got soldiers committed to operations. Multiple source verification. Analyst protection for dissenting opinions. Mandatory review periods for time-sensitive targets. Cultural and historical context requirements. The protocols were strict, demanding, designed to slow down the rush to action that had gotten so many soldiers killed. Military commanders hated them. Soldiers loved them. The protocols went into effect across all combat commands simultaneously. Backlash was immediate and fierce. Officers complained about bureaucratic overreach, about missions being delayed, about opportunities lost. Then the data started coming in. Operations that would have proceeded under old protocols were delayed for additional verification. 80% of those delayed operations were subsequently canceled when the intelligence proved unreliable. The 20% that proceeded after validation had a 93% success rate with minimal casualties. The numbers didn't lie. Within a year, combat deaths from compromised intelligence dropped 47%. Wounded in action from the same cause dropped 61%. The complaints got quieter. On the 2nd anniversary of exposing Ashford, Sarah and Dalton stood in Arlington National Cemetery at Master Sergeant Eric Vance's grave. Sarah placed flowers, the same wildflowers that grew in the Hindu Kush. "We did it," she said quietly. "The protocols are working. Analysts are speaking up. Commands are listening. He'd be proud of you. Of us, you made this possible." Dalton looked at the rows of white headstones stretching into the distance, each one a person, a story, a family that had sacrificed. How many of these could have been prevented? Impossible to say, but the ones from here forward, some of them, not all, but some. She touched her brother's headstone. "And that's worth fighting for." They stood in silence for a long moment. Then Sarah's phone buzzed. She checked it, showed Dalton the screen. "Michelle Brennan. New story running tomorrow. Congressional Medal for Valor being awarded to MS Vance, posthumously. Ceremony next month. Thought you'd want to know first." Sarah's hand shook slightly. "They're giving him a medal." "He earned it. Fought against bad intelligence. Died proving it was wrong. That's valor. Will you come to the ceremony?" "Of course." The ceremony took place on a cold November morning at the Pentagon. Sarah accepted the medal on her brother's behalf from the Secretary of Defense himself. The citation read in part, for extraordinary courage in questioning compromised intelligence despite professional consequences, and for actions in combat that saved 3 members of his team before making the ultimate sacrifice. The families of the other 7 operators killed that day stood in the front row. They applauded when the medal was presented. Some were crying. All were proud. After the ceremony, as photographers captured images for the archives, a young lieutenant approached Sarah and Dalton. "Ms. Vance, Captain Hayes, I'm Lieutenant Morrison. I graduate from intelligence school next month. I just wanted to say, your protocol's what you built. That's what made me want to specialize in this field, knowing I could tell the truth without getting crushed for it." Sarah shook her hand. "Where are you headed?" "Afghanistan, Kandahar." "Scary place." "Yes, ma'am, but less scary knowing people like you are watching out for people like me." After she left, Dalton said, "That's the real victory, not the medal or the headlines. That young analyst who isn't afraid to speak up." "Yeah," Sarah agreed. "That's exactly what we fought for." They walked through the Pentagon halls together, past the photos of generals and secretaries and wars going back decades. The machinery of military bureaucracy grinding on, same as it always had. But different now. Changed. By 2 people who'd refused to accept that broken was just how things were. 5 years after Kara's pass, Dalton received an invitation to speak at Ranger School graduation. He stood before 100 newly minted Rangers and told them the truth. "You're going to face impossible situations. You're going to get orders that don't make sense. You're going to see intelligence that feels wrong. And you're going to have a choice. Follow the plan because it came from above, or trust your gut and push back." He paused, looking at their young faces. "Some of you will follow the plan. You'll do what you're told. You'll be good soldiers, and most of the time that'll work out fine. But some of you, maybe 1 or 2 in this room, you're going to be in a situation where the plan is wrong, where the intelligence is compromised, where following orders means walking your men into an ambush, and in that moment, I need you to be brave enough to say no." He pulled out a photograph. 12 Rangers standing in a valley with mountains behind them, taken 3 days after Kara's pass. These men are alive because one person was brave enough to operate outside the system when the system failed, because someone saw the truth and refused to pretend otherwise, even when it cost her everything. Don't wait for permission to do the right thing. Don't wait for the system to fix itself. If you see a problem, speak up. If you see bad intelligence, question it. If you see soldiers about to walk into a trap, stop them. And if the system tries to crush you for telling the truth, he smiled. Make so much noise they can't bury it. The Rangers stood and applauded. Afterwards, several approached him, asked questions, wanted advice. One sergeant pulled him aside. "Sir, I was at Kara's Pass, Specialist Ortega. I don't know if you remember Danny?" Dalton said, recognizing him. "You made sergeant. Congratulations." "Thank you, sir. I just wanted to say, what you and Ms. Vance did, it changed everything. We train differently now. We question more. We don't just accept bad intel because someone with rank says it's good. That's what we hoped for." "Is she still doing the consulting work?" "Every day, making officers uncomfortable, saving lives." Ortega smiled. "Tell her we said thanks. All of us. We wouldn't be here without her." Dalton found Sarah that evening at their office. She was reviewing an intelligence package for an operation in Somalia, red pen marking problems, notes filling the margins. "How was Ranger School?" she asked without looking up. "Inspirational. Apparently we're changing how they think about intelligence validation." "Good." She marked another passage. "This Somalia intel is garbage, by the way. 3 contradictory source reports and satellite imagery that doesn't match the ground truth." "So we tell them no?" "We tell them fix it or find someone else to risk their lives on guesswork." She set down the pen, rubbed her eyes. "How do people still not get this?" "Because admitting the intelligence is bad means admitting they wasted time and resources. Easier to push forward and hope for the best." "Until soldiers die." "Until soldiers die," he agreed. She stood, stretched, walked to the window overlooking Alexandria. The office building across the street was going dark as people headed home. Normal work, normal lives, nothing life or death about quarterly reports and marketing strategies. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. The simplicity of just being a soldier, taking orders, following the plan. No. Do you? Sometimes? When I'm staring at the fourth intelligence package this week that's going to get people killed if someone doesn't stop it. She turned to face him. But then I remember why we're doing this, and it's worth it. Eric would agree. Yeah, he would. She smiled, the real one, that came easier now than it had 5 years ago. We made something good out of something terrible. That counts for something. It counts for everything. They worked late into the night, red-penning the Somalia package until it was unusable in its current form, sent it back with detailed notes on what needed fixing. The command wouldn't like it. They'd probably complain, might even take their business elsewhere. But if they did take it elsewhere, if they found someone willing to sign off on bad intelligence, Dalton and Sarah would make enough noise that someone higher up would notice, would ask questions, would delay the operation until it was done right. Because that's what they did now. Made noise, asked questions, refused to let bad decisions slide by unnoticed. It wasn't the career either of them had planned, wasn't glamorous or particularly appreciated by the people they served, but it was right, and that was enough. 7 years after Kara's pass, the Washington Post ran a feature story. The Ghosts Who Changed Military Intelligence. It profiled Vance and Hayes' strategic intelligence and their impact on combat operations worldwide, interviewed commands they'd worked with, family members of soldiers who'd lived because an operation got delayed for better verification. The article ended with a quote from Sarah. "We don't do this for recognition. We do it because silence kills. Because someone has to care more about truth than politics. Because every soldier deserves to know the intelligence sending them into harm's way is as solid as we can make it." Beneath that, a quote from Dalton. "The system works when people inside it refuse to let it fail. When they see a problem and fix it instead of hoping someone else will. That's not heroism. That's just basic human decency applied to life and death situations." And at the very end, a statistic. Since the implementation of the Vance protocols, combat deaths from compromised intelligence had decreased 73% across all military branches. 73%. Hundreds of soldiers who came home instead of coming home in flag-draped caskets. Thousands of families who didn't get that knock on the door. All because two people refused to stay silent when staying silent would have been easier. The night the article published, Dalton and Sarah sat on the roof of their office building with cheap beer and expensive whiskey, watching the city lights. "We did okay," Sarah said quietly. "We did better than okay." Eric would have been impossible to live with, would have made this his entire personality. "Sounds like someone else I know." She punched his shoulder, but she was smiling. "You're not wrong." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd started as strangers and become something more. Not romantic, neither of them had time or inclination for that. But partners. Allies. The kind of friendship forged in fire and refined through shared purpose. "What's next?" Dalton asked eventually. "More of the same. More intelligence packages. More uncomfortable conversations. More soldiers saved." She took a drink. "Until we're too old to fight, or they finally listen enough that we're not needed. We'll never not be needed. Probably not. But maybe we train enough people that they can carry it forward, build enough institutional knowledge that this becomes standard instead of exceptional. Lieutenant Morrison is a start, and the others like her." "Yeah." Sarah looked at the stars barely visible through the light pollution. "We plant seeds. We won't see the full forest, but someone will." They stayed on that roof until the city quieted and the night grew cold. Two former soldiers who'd become something harder to define. Watchdogs, truth-tellers. The people who asked the questions nobody wanted to answer. Eventually they climbed down, locked up the office, headed to their separate apartments in the same building. Tomorrow, they'd be back at it. Reviewing intelligence, questioning assessments, making officers uncomfortable. But tonight, they'd earned rest. They'd changed the system. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. And somewhere in those mountains they'd both left behind, the wind still moved through the rocks. The valleys still waited. The silence still held its secrets, but fewer soldiers died learning them. Because two people had refused to let silence be the final word. had refused to accept that this was just how things were, had looked at broken and built something better. The message wasn't complicated. Never mistake silence for weakness. Never confuse compliance with loyalty. Never let fear of consequence stop you from doing what's right. Because sometimes the ghost in the mountains isn't a monster. Sometimes it's the thing that saves you. Sometimes it's the truth you didn't want to hear but desperately needed to. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it's a person who cares enough to keep fighting long after everyone else gave up. The valley remembers. The mountains remember. And because of two people who refused to forget, the system finally learned to listen. That was the real victory. Not medals or headlines or recognition, but the quiet knowledge that somewhere tonight, a soldier was walking into a safer situation because someone had asked the hard questions, because someone had cared more about truth than comfort, because someone had refused to stay silent. And that was worth everything they'd sacrificed, everything they'd lost, everything they'd fought for. The ghosts had spoken, and finally, the world was listening.